dear listeners. Welcome back to our podcast, where we dive into the fascinating world of cultures, traditions, and everyday life. I'm Mira, and I'm thrilled to be here with my co-host, the witty and charming Leo.
That's me. Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of our podcast, where we'll be traveling the world, one country at a time. Today, we're going to China and Guinea-Bissau, two countries that are as different as night and day.
That's right, Leo. And I have to say, I'm to share some of my own personal experiences with you. You see, between our last podcast and this one, I had a rather interesting encounter.
Oh, I'm sure it was. Do tell. Mira, what happened?
Well, I was trying to order a coffee at a cafe, and I accidentally said hello in Chinese to the barista. Let's just say it was a moment of pure chaos.
That's priceless. I can just imagine the look on the barista's face. What's this crazy woman doing?
Yeah, it was pretty funny, but, it's experiences like those that remind me of the importance of learning about different cultures and languages.
Absolutely. And speaking of cultures, our topic for today is a detailed comparison of China and Guinea-Bissau. We'll be answering all the questions that are on your mind, whether you're visiting, living, or marrying someone from one of these countries.
That's right. And I'm to share with you all the fascinating differences between these two countries, from their history and culture to their customs and traditions. We'll be covering it all.
And, of course, we'll be bringing you all the information you need to make informed decisions about your travels or potential moves. So, if you're considering living or working in China or Guinea-Bissau, this podcast is a must-listen.
And, as always, we're proud to be brought to you by the wonderful team at Jetoff AI, who help us make this podcast possible.
Yeah, and they're the ones who have to deal with Mira's coffee-fueled chaos.
Hey, watch it.
Seriously? Folks, we're to share this information with you, and we hope you'll join us on this journey of discovery.
So, let's get started. Our first topic is the basics. We'll be covering everything from language and culture to food and traditions. So, stay tuned, and let's dive in.
And remember, folks, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the chat below. We'll do our best to answer them in our next episode.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel, powered by the amazing team at Jetoff AI.
Yeah? And if you don't, Mira will come after you with a coffee mug.
Oh, Leo, you're such a cod.
All right. Let's get serious for a minute. Our topic for today is a comparison of China and Guinea-Bissau, two countries that are as different as night and day. So, let's dive in and see what we can learn.
That's right, Leo. And I'm to share some of my own personal experiences with you. Stay tuned. Folks, dive into general safety and crime rates for China and Guinea-Bissau. I'm sure many of our listeners have questions about these topics. If you're living in either country, please share your thoughts in the comments section.
Absolutely. And I'm to share some interesting facts. China, with its massive population, has a relatively low crime rate compared to other countries. In fact, according to the Chinese government statistics, the overall crime rate has been decreasing over the past few years.
That's fascinating. Leo, I was expecting to hear about the opposite. Can you explain why China's crime rate is lower than expected?
Well, Mira, one reason is that China has a strong emphasis on community policing. Neighbors look out for each other, and there's a sense of social responsibility that discourages crime. Plus, the government has implemented various initiatives to improve public safety, such as increasing CCTV, EV cameras, and patrol officers.
That makes sense. But what about Guinea-Bissau? I've heard that it's a challenging place in terms of safety.
Yes, unfortunately. Guinea-Bissau does have higher crime rates compared to China. Petty theft, pickpocketing, and armed robbery are common issues. However, It's worth noting that the government is working to improve the situation, with a focus on community-based policing and rehabilitation programs.
I see. So it seems that both countries have their own approaches to addressing crime. But what about the cultural factors that influence safety and crime rates?
Ah, great question. Mira, in China, the concept of Ganshir's social relationships plays a significant role in maintaining social order. People are more likely to report crimes if they know the perpetrator or if it affects their community.
That's an interesting point. Leo, in Guinea-Bissau, I heard that the concept of collective responsibility is also important. Is that related to the Gonsi concept in China?
Not exactly. Mira, in Guinea-Bissau, collective responsibility is more about the community coming together to address problems and maintain social order. It's a more informal approach, but it can be effective in preventing crime.
I'm curious. Leo, how do you think our listeners can stay safe while traveling in these countries?
Well, Mira, for China, it's essential to be aware of your surroundings, especially in crowded areas. Avoid carrying large amounts of cash and keep valuables secure. In Guinea-Bissau, it's crucial to be mindful of your belongings, especially in public areas, and avoid walking alone at night.
Excellent advice. Leo, and what about the role of technology in improving safety and crime rates in these countries?
Ah, that's a great question. Mira, in China, the government has implemented various technological solutions, such as facial recognition systems and AI-powered surveillance. These tools have been effective in reducing crime and improving public safety.
I see. So it seems that both countries are using technology to address crime. But what about the potential risks of relying too heavily on technology?
That's a valid concern. Mira, while technology can be a powerful tool in improving safety, it's essential to ensure that it's used responsibly and that individual freedoms are protected.
Absolutely. Leo. And finally, what about the importance of community engagement in addressing crime and improving safety?
Ah, great point. Mira, in both China and Guinea-Bissau, community engagement is critical in preventing crime and maintaining social order. By working together, communities can build trust and cooperation, which can help to reduce crime rates.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's topic. Thank you, Leo, for sharing your insights on general safety and crime rates in China and Guinea-Bissau.
Thank you, Mira, for hosting this conversation. I hope our listeners have found this discussion informative and engaging. If you have any further questions or comments, please don't hesitate to share them in the comments section.
China is known for its complex governance structure, with the president as head of state and the premier as head of government. But what about social harmony? I'm curious. Have you ever noticed how Chinese people often prioritize collective interests over individual ones?
Ah, that's a fascinating point. Mira, in China, social harmony is indeed deeply rooted in Confucian values, which emphasize the importance of social hierarchy and respect for authority. But have you ever been to a Chinese city during the Lunar New Year celebrations? It's like the whole country comes together to celebrate family and community.
Exactly. And I think that's where the social harmony aspect really shines. Chinese people have a strong sense of community and respect for tradition. But what about governance? How does China's one-party system affect its political stability?
Well, Mira, China's one-party system is often criticized for its lack of transparency and accountability. But from what I've seen, the government has made significant efforts to improve governance and increase transparency in recent years. And let's not forget the impressive infrastructure development in China. It's a testament to the government's ability to progress.
That's true. But I'm not sure if I'd call it impressive just yet. I mean, have you seen the air quality in some of the major cities? It's not exactly the most stable or harmonious environment. And what about the human rights situation in China? Doesn't that raise some concerns?
Ah, now that's a topic for debate. Mira, while China's human rights record is indeed a concern, it's also worth noting that the government has made efforts to improve human rights and social welfare in recent years. And let's not forget the incredible economic progress China has made. It's a major achievement that's benefited millions of people.
I see what you're saying, but I still think there's a lot to unpack when it comes to China's governance and social harmony. And speaking of unpacking, have you ever tried to navigate the complexities of Chinese bureaucracy? It's like trying to solve a puzzle blindfolded.
Oh, Mira, you're such a comedian. But seriously, I think you make a good point. Bureaucracy can be a major challenge in China, especially for foreigners. But from what I've seen, the government is working to streamline processes and improve services for citizens.
That's reassuring to hear, Leo. And I think it's worth noting that China's social harmony is not just about governance, it's also about cultural values and community norms. For example, have you ever noticed how Chinese people often prioritize group harmony over individual interests?
Yes, I have. And it's actually quite fascinating to see how this plays out in everyday life. For instance, in China, it's common to see people waiting in line for hours to avoid disrupting the queue. It's a great example of collective responsibility.
Exactly. And I think that's a great example of how social harmony can be fostered in a community. But what about Guinea-Bissau? How does its governance structure compare to China's?
Now that's a great question. Lira, Guinea-Bissau has a more democratic system, with the president as head of state and the prime minister as head of government. And let's not forget the country's rich cultural heritage. It's a great example of how social harmony can be fostered through community and tradition.
That's so true, Leo. And I think it's worth noting that Guinea-Bissau has made significant progress in recent years, despite facing many challenges. For example, have you ever heard about the country's efforts to promote democracy and good governance?
Yes, I have. And it's actually quite impressive to see how the government has worked to strengthen institutions and promote transparency. And let's not forget the country's rich cultural heritage. It's a great example of how social harmony can be fostered through community and tradition.
Exactly. And I think it's worth noting that both China and Guinea-Bissau have their own unique strengths and challenges when it comes to governance and social harmony. But what about our listeners? Have any of them lived or traveled to either of these countries? I'm curious to hear their experiences.
That's a great question. Mira, I'm actually curious to hear from our listeners too. If you've lived or traveled to China or Guinea-Bissau, please share your experiences with us in the comments.
For more insights like this, don't forget to check out JetOff. AI, they have some amazing resources on cultural competency and global citizenship. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like to discuss, feel free to share them with us in the comments.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more fascinating conversations about global cultures and community development. We'll be back soon with another exciting episode.
I'm sure our listeners are eager to dive into the economic conditions and costs of living in China and Guinea-Bissau. Let's start with the basics: job market trends. China has a massive workforce, with a growing middle class. But what about Guinea-Bissau? Leo, what can you tell us about the job market in Guinea-Bissau?
Well, Mira, Guinea-Bissau's economy is primarily driven by agriculture, fishing, and remittances from abroad. It's a small, developing country, and the job market is relatively limited. But, I must say, the cost of living is quite low, especially when it comes to food and housing. You can get a decent meal for under $5, and rent a small apartment for around $100 a month.
Wow, that's impressive. And what about China? With its massive population and growing economy, I'm sure the job market is much more competitive. Can you tell us more about the cost of living in China? Leo?
Yes. China's economy is indeed booming, and the job market is highly competitive. However, the cost of living in cities like Shanghai and Beijing is quite high. Rent, food, and transportation can be expensive, especially for foreigners. But, on the other hand, salaries are also higher, and many companies offer competitive benefits.
That's true, Leo. But what about the cost of living in rural areas of China? I'm sure it's much more affordable, right?
Yes, that's correct. rural areas in China are generally much more affordable, with lower housing costs and lower prices for food and transportation. In fact, some rural areas in China are even cheaper than Guinea-Bissau.
Well, that's an interesting comparison. But let's talk about the cost of living in Guinea-Bissau. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the shopping scene. What can you tell us about shopping in Guinea-Bissau? Leo?
Well, Mira, shopping in Guinea-Bissau is quite an adventure. You'll find traditional markets selling everything from fresh produce to local handicrafts. And, of course, there are modern supermarkets and stores selling imported goods. But, be warned, prices can be high, especially for imported goods.
That's true. And what about China? What's the shopping scene like in China? I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the various shopping options.
Yes. China has a vast shopping scene, from traditional markets to modern shopping malls. You'll find everything from cheap knockoffs to high-end designer brands. And, of course, there are the famous night markets, where you can find everything from street food to souvenirs.
That's a lot of shopping options. But let's talk about the cost of living in China. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the transportation costs. What can you tell us about transportation in China? Leo?
Well, it's kind of like I said. Mira, transportation in China can be quite affordable, especially if you use public transportation. You can get a bus ticket for under $1, and a subway ticket for around $1. But, of course, taxis and private cars can be more expensive.
That's true. And what about Guinea-Bissau? What's the transportation scene like in Guinea-Bissau? I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the various transportation options.
Well, Mira, transportation in Guinea-Bissau is relatively limited. You'll find buses and taxis, but they're not always reliable. And, of course, there are the traditional modes of transportation, like bicycles and motorbikes.
Well, that's an interesting comparison. But let's talk about the cost of living in Guinea-Bissau. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the housing scene. What can you tell us about housing in Guinea-Bissau? Leo?
Well, housing in Guinea-Bissau is relatively affordable. You can rent a small apartment for under $100 a month, and even buy a house for around $10. Zareth, but, of course, the quality of housing can vary greatly.
That's true. And what about China? What's the housing scene like in China? I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the various housing options.
Yes. China has a vast housing market, from affordable apartments to luxury villas. You'll find everything from high-rise apartments to traditional courtyard houses. And, of course, there are the famous hutongs, where you can find traditional Beijing-style housing.
That's a lot of housing options. But let's talk about the cost of living in China. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the healthcare costs. What can you tell us about healthcare in China? Leo?
Well, it's kind of like I say. Mira, healthcare in China can be quite affordable, especially if you have insurance. You can get medical treatment for under $10, and even surgery for under $1. Zirith, but, of course, the quality of healthcare can vary greatly.
That's true. And what about Guinea-Bissau? What's the healthcare scene like in Guinea-Bissau? I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the various healthcare options.
Well, Mira, healthcare in Guinea-Bissau is relatively limited. You'll find public hospitals and clinics, but they're not always reliable. And, of course, there are the traditional healers, who use traditional medicine.
Well, that's an interesting comparison. But let's talk about the cost of living in Guinea-Bissau. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the education system. What can you tell us about education in Guinea-Bissau? Leo?
Well, Mira, education in Guinea-Bissau is relatively affordable. You can get a university degree for under $1. So I think that we can conquer that. But, of course, the quality of education can vary greatly.
That's true. And what about China? What's the education system like in China? I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the various education options.
Yes. China has a highly competitive education system, from primary school to university. You'll find everything from affordable public schools to expensive private schools. And, of course, there are the famous universities, like Tsinghua and Peking University.
Well, that's a lot of education options. But let's talk about the cost of living in China. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the taxes and fees. What can you tell us about taxes and fees in China? Leo?
Well, Mira, taxes and fees in China can be quite complex.
So, when it comes to accommodation options in China, I have to say, the choices are endless. From high-rise apartments in Shanghai to traditional courtyard homes in Beijing, you'll find something to suit every taste and budget.
Yes. And let's not forget the infamous Shanghai apartment complexes that resemble giant Lego blocks. I mean, who needs character when you have 50 identical buildings? Right?
Well, I think they're quite efficient, actually, and the prices are very competitive. But, of course, there are also some amazing traditional homes in China that are steeped in history and culture.
That's true. But have you ever tried to navigate the bureaucracy of buying a traditional Chinese home? It's like trying to solve a puzzle blindfolded while being attacked by a swarm of bees.
Leo, you're such a drama queen. But, seriously, it can be a bit challenging, especially if you don't speak Mandarin. But, with the right guidance, it's definitely possible.
I'm sure it is. But I'm just saying, if I had to deal with all those permits and paperwork, I'd probably end up in a padded cell.
Well, I'm sure our listeners who have lived in China can attest to the fact that it's not all smooth sailing. But, overall, the country offers a wide range of accommodation options, from modern apartments to traditional homes.
And of course, there's the added bonus of being able to experience the infamous Chinese Airbnb listings, which are always a thrill.
Oh, Leo, you're such a card. But, seriously, Airbnb can be a great option for short-term stays in China. And for long-term rentals, there are many websites and agencies that can help you find a suitable place.
That's true. But have you ever tried to navigate the world of Chinese real estate agents? It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack while being watched by a hawk.
Oh, Leo, you're such a comedian. But it's not that difficult. Just make sure you do your research and find a reputable agent who speaks English.
Yes. Because nothing says reputable agent like someone who's been practicing their English on their cat for the past 5 years.
Oh, Leo, you're such a wit. But seriously, it's not that hard to find a good agent. Just be patient and do your research.
I'm sure it's not. But I'm just saying, if I had to deal with all those agents, I'd probably end up with a headache the size of the Great Wall of China.
Well, I'm sure our listeners who have lived in China can attest to the fact that it's not all smooth sailing. But overall, the country offers a wide range of accommodation options, from modern apartments to traditional homes.
And of course, there's the added bonus of being able to experience the infamous Chinese traffic jams, which are always a thrill.
Oh, Leo, you're such a card. But seriously, traffic can be a challenge in China, especially in major cities like Beijing and Shanghai.
That's true. But have you ever tried to navigate the world of Chinese public transportation? It's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube while being attacked by a swarm of bees.
Oh, Leo, you're such a drama queen. But public transportation in China is quite efficient, and there are many apps and websites that can help you navigate the system.
I'm sure they are. But I'm just saying, if I had to deal with all those apps and websites, I'd probably end up with a headache the size of the Great Wall of China.
Well, I'm sure our listeners who have lived in China can attest to the fact that it's not all smooth sailing. But overall, the country offers a wide range of accommodation options, from modern apartments to traditional homes.
And, of course, there's the added bonus of being able to experience the infamous Chinese bureaucracy, which is always a thrill.
Oh, Leo, you're such a coward. But, seriously, bureaucracy can be a challenge in China, especially when it comes to things like visa applications and property ownership.
That's true. But have you ever tried to navigate the world of Chinese visa applications? It's like trying to solve a puzzle blindfolded while being attacked by a swarm of bees.
Oh, Leo, you're such a drama queen. But visa applications can be a bit of a challenge. But there are many resources available to help you navigate the process.
I'm sure they are. But I'm just saying, if I had to deal with all those applications and paperwork, I'd probably end up in a padded cell.
Well, I'm sure our listeners who have lived in China can attest to the fact that it's not all smooth sailing. But, overall, the country offers a wide range of accommodation options, from modern apartments to traditional homes.
And of course, there's the added bonus of being able to experience the infamous Chinese culture, which is always a thrill.
Oh, Leo, you're such a coward. But Chinese culture is incredibly rich and diverse, and there's always something new to learn and discover.
That's true. But have you ever tried to navigate the world of Chinese festivals and traditions? It's like trying to solve a puzzle blindfolded while being attacked by a swarm of bees.
Oh, Leo, you're such a drama queen. But, seriously, festivals and traditions are an integral part of Chinese culture, and there's always something new to learn and discover.
I'm sure there is. But I'm just saying, if I had to deal with all those festivals and traditions, I'd probably end up with a headache the size of the Great Wall of China.
Well, I'm sure our listeners who have lived in China can attest to the fact that it's not all smooth sailing. But, overall, the country offers a wide range of accommodation options, from modern apartments to traditional homes.
And of course, there's the added bonus of being able to experience the infamous Chinese food, which is always a thrill.
Oh, Leo, you're such a coward. But, seriously, Chinese food is incredibly diverse and delicious, and there's always something new to try.
That's true. But have you ever tried to?
Let's dive into the world of visa applications and immigration procedures for expats in China and Guinea-Bissau. I'm curious, Leo, had you ever applied for a visa to China? How was your experience?
Ah, yes. I once applied for a tourist visa. And it was a breeze, thanks to my travel agent. But I'm sure it's not that simple for everyone. China's got a complex system, and the requirements can be overwhelming. Did you know that some nationalities need to apply in person, while others can do it online?
Well, that's true. I've heard that China's online application system can be a bit finicky. But I've also read that Guinea-Bissau has a relatively straightforward process. Can you tell me more about it? Leo?
Ah, yes. Guinea-Bissau has a simple and efficient system. You can apply for a visa on arrival, and it's usually processed within a few hours. But I've also heard that the process can be a bit unpredictable, and some officials might task for extra documentation.
That's interesting. I've read that China has a one-stop service for visa applications, which includes a 24-hour online application system. But I've also heard that it can be slow, and some applicants have reported waiting 4 days or even weeks for their visas to be processed.
Yes, I've heard that too. And it's not just the application process that's a challenge. China's got a lot of regulations and restrictions, especially when it comes to working visas. Did you know that some nationalities are restricted from working in certain industries?
That's true. I've read that China has strict regulations around employment, and some nationalities are required to obtain a work permit before starting a job. But I've also heard that Guinea-Bissau has a more relaxed approach to work permits. Can you tell me more about it? Leo?
Ah, yes. Guinea-Bissau has a relatively relaxed approach to work permits. You can apply for a work permit online, and it's usually processed within a few days. But I've also heard that the process can be a bit unpredictable, and some officials might ask for extra documentation.
That's reassuring to hear. I've read that China has a reputation for being one of the most bureaucratic countries in the world. But I've also heard that Guinea-Bissau is working to improve its immigration system. Can you tell me more about that? Leah?
Yes. Guinea-Bissau is indeed working to improve its immigration system. They've introduced a new online application system, and they're also working to reduce the processing time for visa applications. But I've also heard that the system can be a bit fragile, and some officials might be resistant to change.
That's interesting. I've read that China has a lot of resources available for expats, including a dedicated website for visa applications and a 24-hour hotline. But I've also heard that the website can be confusing, and the hotline can be difficult to reach.
Yes, I've heard that too. And it's not just the resources that are a challenge. China's got a lot of cultural and language barriers that can make it difficult for expats to navigate the system. Did you know that some provinces in China have their own unique regulations and requirements?
That's true. I've read that China has a complex system of provincial and local regulations, which can make it difficult for expats to keep up. But I've also heard that Guinea-Bissau has a more centralized approach to immigration, which can make it easier for expats to navigate.
Yes. Guinea-Bissau has a more centralized approach to immigration, which can make it easier for expats to navigate. But I've also heard that the system can be a bit slow, and some officials might be resistant to change.
That's reassuring to hear. I've read that China has a lot of resources available for expats, including a dedicated website for visa applications and a 24-hour hotline. But I've also heard that the website can be confusing, and the hotline can be difficult to reach. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments.
Yes, I've heard that too. And it's not just the resources that are a challenge. China's got a lot of cultural and language barriers that can make it difficult for expats to navigate the system. Did you know that some provinces in China have their own unique regulations and requirements?
That's true. I've read that China has a complex system of provincial and local regulations, which can make it difficult for expats to keep up. But I've heard that Guinea-Bissau has a more straightforward approach to immigration, which can make it easier for expats to navigate.
Yes. Guinea-Bissau has a more straightforward approach to immigration, which can make it easier for expats to navigate. But I've also heard that the system can be a bit slow, and some officials might be resistant to change.
That's reassuring to hear. I've read that China has a reputation for being one of the most bureaucratic countries in the world. But I've also heard that Guinea-Bissau is working to improve its immigration system. Can you tell me more about that, Leo?
Yes. Guinea-Bissau is indeed working to improve its immigration system. They've introduced a new online application system, and they're also working to reduce the processing time for visa applications. But I've also heard that the system can be a bit fragile, and some officials might be resistant to change.
That's interesting. I've read that China has a lot of resources available for expats, including a dedicated website for visa applications and a 24-hour hotline. But I've also heard that the website can be confusing, and the hotline can be difficult to reach.
Yes, I've heard that too. And it's not just the resources that are a challenge. China's got a lot of cultural and language barriers that can make it difficult for expats to navigate the system. Did you know that some provinces in China have their own unique regulations and requirements?
That's true. I've read that China has a complex system of provincial and local regulations, which can make it difficult for expats to keep up. But I've also heard that Guinea-Bissau has a more centralized approach to immigration, which can make it easier for expats to navigate.
Yes. Guinea-Bissau has a more centralized approach to immigration, which can make it easier for expats to navigate. But I've also heard that the system can be a bit slow, and some officials might be resistant to change.
That's reassuring to hear. I've read that China has a lot of resources available for expats, including a dedicated website for visa applications and a 24-hour hotline. But I've also heard that the website can be confusing, and the hotline can be difficult to reach. If you've had any experiences with China's So, when it comes to China's healthcare system, one thing that strikes me is the sheer scale of their medical infrastructure. They have an impressive network of hospitals, clinics, and medical facilities, catering to a massive population. I mean, who wouldn't want to tap into that?
Ah, indeed. Mira, China's got a remarkable healthcare system, especially when it comes to urban areas. But let's not forget about the rural regions, where access to quality healthcare can be a challenge. I'm sure our listeners living in China can attest to this.
That's a great point, Leo. And interestingly, China's healthcare system is also known for its focus on preventive care. They've implemented various initiatives to promote healthy lifestyles, such as the Healthy China 2030 plan. I'm curious, have any of our listeners tried any of these programs?
Actually, Mira, I've heard that China's healthcare system is also quite expensive, especially for foreigners. I mean, getting medical treatment in China can be a costly affair, unless you're covered by a decent insurance plan.
Ah, yes, that's true. But, on the other hand, China's medical technology is also quite advanced. They've made significant strides in areas like organ transplantation, cancer treatment, and even gene editing. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about this.
Absolutely. Mira, and let's not forget about the cultural aspect of healthcare in China. For instance, traditional Chinese medicine is still widely practiced, and many Chinese people prefer it over Western medicine. I'm curious, have any of our listeners tried traditional Chinese medicine?
Well, Leo, I think it's fascinating how China's healthcare system blends traditional and modern approaches. But I'm sure our listeners in China would agree with me that navigating the healthcare system can be quite complex, especially for foreigners.
That's true, Mira. And, in contrast, Guinea-Bissau's healthcare system is quite different from China's. In fact, Guinea-Bissau has one of the lowest life expectancy rates in the world. I'm sure our listeners living in Guinea-Bissau can attest to the challenges they face in accessing quality healthcare.
Wow, that's a sobering statistic, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that Guinea-Bissau's healthcare system is indeed in need of improvement. But I'm curious, what are some of the factors contributing to this situation?
Well, Mira, one of the main issues in Guinea-Bissau is the lack of medical infrastructure. They have very few hospitals and medical facilities, and those that exist are often understaffed and under-resourced.
Ah, I see. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that this lack of infrastructure makes it difficult for people to access quality healthcare. But I'm also curious, what about the role of traditional healers in Guinea-Bissau's healthcare system?
Ah, yes. Traditional healers play a significant role in Guinea-Bissau's healthcare system. In fact, many people in Guinea-Bissau still rely on traditional healers for their healthcare needs. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about this.
Well, Leo, I think it's fascinating how Guinea-Bissau's healthcare system is shaped by its cultural context. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that navigating the healthcare system in Guinea-Bissau can be quite challenging.
That's true, Mira. And let's not forget about the importance of community-based healthcare in Guinea-Bissau. In fact, many organizations are working to promote community-based healthcare initiatives in the country. I'm curious, have any of our listeners been involved in such initiatives?
Yes. That's a great point, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that community-based healthcare is an essential aspect of Guinea-Bissau's healthcare system. But I'm also curious, what about the role of technology in Guinea-Bissau's healthcare system?
Yes. Technology is playing an increasingly important role in Guinea-Bissau's healthcare system. In fact, many organizations are working to promote the use of telemedicine and other digital health technologies in the country. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about this.
Well, Leo, I think it's fascinating how Guinea-Bissau's healthcare system is evolving to incorporate new technologies. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that this is a positive development.
That's true. Mira, and let's not forget about the importance of healthcare policy in Guinea-Bissau. The government has implemented various policies to improve the healthcare system, such as the National Health Policy Plan. I'm curious, have any of our listeners been involved in healthcare policy making in Guinea-Bissau?
Oh, yes, that's a great point, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that healthcare policy is a critical aspect of Guinea-Bissau's healthcare system. But I'm also curious, what about the role of international cooperation in Guinea-Bissau's healthcare system?
Yes. International cooperation is playing a crucial role in Guinea-Bissau's healthcare system. In fact, many international organizations are working with the government to improve the healthcare system, such as the World Health Organization. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about this.
Well, Leo, I think it's fascinating how Guinea-Bissau's healthcare system is benefiting from international cooperation. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that this is a positive development.
That's true. Mira, and let's not forget about the importance of healthcare education in Guinea-Bissau. In fact, many organizations are working to promote healthcare education and awareness in the country. I'm curious, have any of our listeners been involved in healthcare education initiatives in Guinea-Bissau?
Oh, yes, that's a great point, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that healthcare education is an essential aspect of Guinea-Bissau's healthcare system.
That's true. Mira, and let's summarize what we've discussed so far. China's healthcare system is impressive, but also complex, while Guinea-Bissau's healthcare system faces significant challenges. I'm sure our listeners would agree that both countries have unique healthcare systems that require attention and support.
Well, Leo, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this criterion. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that understanding the nuances of each country's healthcare system is crucial for anyone living or working in these countries. All right, let's dive into transportation infrastructure and convenience in China and Guinea-Bissau. Both countries have made significant strides in modernizing their transportation systems, but there are also some unique challenges they face.
That's right. Mira, China has invested heavily in high-speed rail, with over 0 kilometers of track in a network that spans across the country. It's a game changer for both locals and tourists alike.
But what about Guinea-Bissau? I bet our listeners in this country relate to the traffic chaos on the streets of Bissau.
Yeah. Guinea-Bissau's traffic situation is indeed a challenge. The country's road network is relatively underdeveloped, and the majority of roads are paved. But despite these challenges, the government has been working to improve the transportation infrastructure, especially in the capital city.
I've read that China has also invested in urban public transportation systems, including bus rapid transit and light rail. These systems have greatly improved the mobility of citizens and reduced air pollution.
Exactly. And speaking of public transportation, Guinea-Bissau has a relatively well-developed bus network, especially in Bissau. However, the buses can be quite crowded and uncomfortable, especially during peak hours.
I can imagine. So, what about air travel? China has a vast network of airports, with many international airports serving major cities like Beijing and Shanghai.
Yeah, China's aviation sector has grown significantly in recent years, with many domestic and international flights connecting major cities across the country. But Guinea-Bissau's airport infrastructure is still quite limited, with only one international airport serving the country.
I've heard that China has also invested in high-speed rail in other countries, like Thailand and Indonesia. Do you think this is a model that Guinea-Bissau could follow?
That's an interesting question. Vera, while China's high-speed rail model has been successful in many countries, it's not clear whether it would be feasible in Guinea-Bissau, given the country's limited resources and infrastructure.
So, let's talk about road quality. China has made significant investments in highway construction, with many roads now featuring four-lane highways and even more.
That's true. Mira, China's highway network is indeed one of the most extensive in the world. But Guinea-Bissau's roads are still largely uphill, which can make travel quite uncomfortable, especially during the rainy season.
I bet our listeners in Guinea-Bissau can relate to that. So what about bike sharing and car sharing services? China has seen a rise in popularity of these services, especially in cities like Beijing and Shanghai.
Yeah, bike sharing and car sharing services have become increasingly popular in China, especially among young people who value convenience and flexibility. But Guinea-Bissau's transportation landscape is still largely dominated by private vehicles, with limited options for bike sharing or car sharing services.
So, let's talk about public transportation costs. In China, the cost of using public transportation is generally quite low, with many bus and metro rides costing less than $1.
That's right. Mira, China's public transportation system is designed to be affordable and accessible to all, with many cities offering free or discounted fares for students, seniors, and people with disabilities. But in Guinea-Bissau, the cost of using public transportation can be quite high, especially for long-distance trips.
I've read that China has also invested in smart transportation systems, including intelligent transportation systems and smart traffic management. These systems have greatly improved traffic flow and reduced congestion in major cities.
That's true. Mira, China's ITS and smart traffic management systems have been widely adopted in many cities, with impressive results. But Guinea-Bissau's transportation infrastructure is still largely manual, with limited use of technology to manage traffic flow.
So, what do you think are the key takeaways from our transportation infrastructure and convenience in China and Guinea-Bissau?
Well, Mira, it's clear that both countries have made significant strides in modernizing their transportation systems. But there are still many challenges to overcome. China's investment in high-speed rail, urban public transportation, and smart transportation systems has greatly improved the mobility of citizens and reduced congestion in major cities. In contrast, Guinea-Bissau's transportation landscape is still largely dominated by private vehicles, with limited options for public transportation and smart transportation systems.
I think that's a great summary. Leo, thanks for joining me on this journey through the transportation infrastructure and convenience in China and Guinea-Bissau.
No problem. Mira, it's been a pleasure discussing this topic with you.
I'm curious. Leo, have you ever tried to order food in China without speaking a word of Mandarin? I bet it was a challenge.
Oh, Mira, you know me too well. I once tried to order a bowl of noodles in Shanghai, and the chef looked at me like I was speaking gibberish. I ended up with a plate of vegetables instead of noodles.
That's hilarious. I had my share of misadventures with language too. But let's talk about China's language landscape. With over 300 languages spoken, it's a linguistic melting pot. I'm sure our listeners living in China would agree that it's not easy to navigate.
Exactly. And it's not just the dialects that can be challenging. The writing system is also a maze. I've seen people struggle to read Chinese characters, even after living there for years.
That's true. But what's interesting is that China has a long history of language exchange and cultural diffusion. The Silk Road, for example, played a significant role in spreading languages and ideas across the ancient world.
Ah, yes. The Silk Road was a major hub for trade and cultural exchange. And it's fascinating to see how languages like Mandarin, Cantonese, and Tibetan have influenced each other over time.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think language exchange programs like Confucius Institutes are effective in promoting cultural understanding between China and the West?
Well, I think it's a great initiative, but it's not without its challenges. I've seen some critics argue that these programs can be focused on promoting Chinese language and culture, rather than fostering genuine cultural exchange.
That's a valid point. But what about Guinea-Bissau? Our second country? How does the language landscape differ there?
Guinea-Bissau is a great example of a country with a rich linguistic diversity. The official language is Portuguese, but many people also speak local languages like Bialanta, Fula, and Mandinka.
Wow, that's a lot of languages. I've heard that Guinea-Bissau has a unique cultural identity shaped by its history as a Portuguese colony. Do you think this has influenced the way people communicate in the country?
Absolutely. The Portuguese influence is still visible in the language and culture of Guinea-Bissau. But it's also interesting to see how local languages and traditions have adapted to this colonial legacy.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Guinea-Bissau would agree that language is a key aspect of cultural identity. But what about expats and tourists? How do they navigate the language barrier in Guinea-Bissau?
Well, it's not always easy. But many people have reported that the locals are generally friendly, unwilling to help. Of course, it helps to learn a few basic phrases in Portuguese and local languages like Biolanta.
That's great advice. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that language is a key aspect of any cultural experience. Whether you're in China or Guinea-Bissau, learning a few key phrases can go a long way in building connections with locals.
Absolutely. And it's not just about language. It's also about cultural understanding and empathy. I think that's what makes cross-cultural communication so fascinating.
I couldn't agree more. Leo. And I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks for sharing your insights on language barriers and ease of communication in China and Guinea-Bissau.
The pleasure is mine, Mia, and I hope our listeners have enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. If you have any thoughts on language exchange or cultural communication, please let us know in the comments.
So, let's dive into the cultural diversity and tolerance in China and Guinea-Bissau. I'm curious. Leo, what do you think is the most striking aspect of China's cultural landscape?
I think it's the sheer size and complexity of the country. With 56 officially recognized ethnic groups, China's cultural diversity is a true marvel. But, of course, this diversity also comes with its own set of challenges.
That's an excellent point. Leo, and speaking of challenges, I've heard that China's government has been working to promote social harmony and stability. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, indeed. China's government has launched several initiatives to promote social harmony, including the Spirit of Shanghai campaign, which aims to promote tolerance and understanding between different ethnic groups. But I have to say, it's a bit like trying to put a square peg into a round hole. It's not always easy to implement these kinds of initiatives.
I see what you mean, Leo. And now, let's talk about Guinea-Bissau. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this country's cultural diversity. Have you ever been to Guinea-Bissau? Leo?
No. I haven't been to Guinea-Bissau, but I've heard it's a fascinating country with a rich cultural heritage. From the Biolanta people's traditional dances to the Fulani people's nomadic lifestyle, Guinea-Bissau is a true melting pot of cultures.
That's so true, Leo. And speaking of melting pots, I've heard that Guinea-Bissau has a strong tradition of accepting refugees and immigrants. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, indeed. Guinea-Bissau has a long history of welcoming refugees and immigrants from neighboring countries, including Senegal and Guinea. It's a testament to the country's commitment to social tolerance and acceptance.
I'm certain that our listeners living in China would agree with me that the country's cultural diversity is a major asset. But I'm also curious to know, Leo, what do you think is the most unique aspect of China's cultural landscape?
That's a tough question, Mira, but I think it's the way in which China's cultural heritage is so deeply intertwined with its history and politics. From the Forbidden City to the Great Wall, China's cultural landmarks are steeped in history and politics.
That's a fascinating point. And now, let's talk about Guinea-Bissau's cultural diversity. I'm actually curious to know, Leo, what do you think is the most striking aspect of Guinea-Bissau's cultural landscape?
I think it's the way in which Guinea-Bissau's different ethnic groups have managed to coexist despite their cultural and linguistic differences. From the Biolanta people's traditional dances to the Fulani people's nomadic lifestyle, Guinea-Bissau's cultural diversity is a true marvel.
That's so true, Leo. And speaking of coexistence, I've heard that Guinea-Bissau has a strong tradition of promoting social tolerance and acceptance. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, indeed. Guinea-Bissau's government has launched several initiatives to promote social tolerance and acceptance, including the Guinea-Bissau for All campaign, which aims to promote understanding and respect between different ethnic groups.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Guinea-Bissau would agree with me that the country's cultural diversity is a major asset. But I'm also curious to know, Leo, what do you think is the most unique aspect of Guinea-Bissau's cultural landscape?
That's a tough question, Mira. But I think it's the way in which Guinea-Bissau's cultural heritage is so deeply intertwined with its history and politics. From the country's struggle for independence to its current efforts to promote social tolerance and acceptance, Guinea-Bissau's cultural landscape is a complex and fascinating one.
I see what you mean, Leo. And now, let's talk about the challenges that both China and Guinea-Bissau face in terms of cultural diversity and tolerance. I'm actually curious to know, Leo, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing China's cultural landscape?
I think it's the way in which China's government has struggled to balance the country's cultural diversity with its efforts to promote social stability. It's a delicate balance, but one that is essential for promoting social tolerance and acceptance.
That's a great point, Leo. And speaking of challenges, I've heard that Guinea-Bissau faces its own set of challenges when it comes to promoting social tolerance and acceptance. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, indeed. Guinea-Bissau's government has struggled to promote social tolerance and acceptance in the face of poverty and economic inequality. It's a difficult challenge, but one that is essential for promoting social cohesion and stability.
I'm certain that our listeners living in China would agree with me that the country's cultural diversity is a major asset. But I'm also curious to know, Leo, what do you think is the most unique aspect of China's cultural landscape?
That's a tough question. Yeah, but I think it's the way in which China's cultural heritage is so deeply intertwined with its history and politics. From the Forbidden City to the Great Wall, China's cultural landmarks are steeped in history and politics.
That's a fascinating point, Leo. And now, let's talk about the importance of promoting social tolerance and acceptance in both China and Guinea-Bissau. I'm actually curious to know, Leo, what do you think is the most effective way to promote social tolerance and acceptance?
I think it's through education and awareness-raising campaigns. By educating people about the importance of social tolerance and acceptance, we can promote a culture of understanding and respect between different ethnic groups.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Guinea-Bissau would agree with me that the country's cultural diversity is a major asset. But I'm also curious to know, Leo, what do you think is the most unique aspect of Guinea-Bissau's cultural landscape?
That's a tough question, Mira. But I think it's the way in which Guinea-Bissau's cultural heritage is so deeply intertwined with its history and politics. From the country's struggle for independence to its current efforts to promote social tolerance and acceptance, Guinea-Bissau's cultural landscape is a complex and fascinating one.
I see what you mean, Leo. And now, let's talk about the importance of promoting social tolerance and acceptance in both China and Guinea-Bissau. I'm actually curious to know, Leo, what do you think is the most effective way to promote social tolerance and acceptance?
I think it's through education and awareness-raising campaigns. By educating people about the importance of social tolerance and acceptance, we can promote a culture of understanding and respect.
I'm curious about the educational landscape in China and Guinea-Bissau. Let's start with China's impressive literacy rate. In fact, it's one of the highest in the world. I'm certain that our listeners living in China would agree with me.
That's right. Mira, China's literacy rate is indeed impressive. However, what's even more fascinating is the country's emphasis on vocational training. They have a well-structured system that prepares students for the workforce. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do they agree that vocational training is the way to go?
I think it's a great approach. China's vocational training programs are highly respected, and they offer students a chance to learn a trade and earn a living. But let's talk about Guinea-Bissau for a moment. What's the literacy rate like there?
Guinea-Bissau's literacy rate is a bit lower compared to China. But they're working hard to improve it. In fact, The government has implemented several initiatives to increase access to education, especially in rural areas. It's a bit of a challenge, but I'm sure our listeners from Guinea-Bissau would agree that education is key to a better future.
That's so true. Leo, education is indeed key to a better future. And it's great to see countries like Guinea-Bissau working towards improving their literacy rates. But let's get back to China for a moment. What's the situation like with language learning in China?
Language learning is a big deal in China. Mira, the country has a rich linguistic diversity, with many languages spoken across different regions. Mandarin Chinese is the official language, but there are also many minority languages spoken in the country. In fact, China has a long history of language learning and has made significant contributions to the field of linguistics.
That's fascinating, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners from China would agree that language learning is an important part of the country's rich cultural heritage. But let's talk about Guinea-Bissau for a moment. What's the situation like with language learning in Guinea-Bissau?
Guinea-Bissau has a relatively simple language landscape. Mira, the official language is Portuguese, but many people also speaks Iriulo, which is a Creole language. Language learning is an important part of the country's education system, and many students learn multiple languages throughout their school career.
That's great to hear, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners from Guinea-Bissau would agree that language learning is an essential part of the country's education system. But let's get back to China for a moment. What's the situation like with language schools in China?
Language schools in China are highly regarded. Mira, many language schools offer a range of programs, from beginner to advanced levels. Some of the most popular languages taught in China include English, Spanish, and French. Language schools in China often have a high demand, especially among international students who want to learn Mandarin Chinese.
That's right. And I'm sure our listeners from China would agree that language schools are a great way to learn a new language. But let's talk about Guinea-Bissau for a moment. What's the situation like with language schools in Guinea-Bissau?
Language schools in Guinea-Bissau are relatively scarce. However, the country has a few language schools that offer programs in Portuguese and Criollo. These schools often have a limited capacity, but they play an important role in promoting language learning in the country.
That's great to hear, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners from Guinea-Bissau would agree that language schools are an essential part of the country's education system. But let's get back to China for a moment. What's the situation like with language learning in rural areas of China?
Language learning in rural areas of China can be a bit challenging. Mira, many rural areas have limited access to language schools and resources. However, the government has implemented several initiatives to improve language learning in these areas, including the establishment of language schools and the training of language teachers.
That's great to hear, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners from China would agree that language learning is an essential part of the country's education system, regardless of where they live. But let's talk about Guinea-Bissau for a moment. What's the situation like with language learning in rural areas of Guinea-Bissau?
Language learning in rural areas of Guinea-Bissau can be a bit challenging. Mira, many rural areas have limited access to language schools and resources. However, the government has implemented several initiatives to improve language learning in these areas, including the establishment of language schools and the training of language teachers.
That's great to hear, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners from Guinea-Bissau would agree that language learning is an essential part of the country's education system, regardless of where they live. Dive into the fascinating world of climate and seasonal conditions in China and Guinea-Bissau. I'm curious, Leo, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of China's climate?
That's an easy one. Mira, China's climate is as diverse as its cuisine, from scorching hot summers to freezing cold winters, and everything in between. But, I've always been fascinated by the extreme weather events in China, like the massive sandstorms that sweep across the Gobi Desert.
Wow, that sounds like a real-life adventure movie. I'm sure our listeners who have experienced those sandstorms would agree with me. But Let's talk about Guinea-Bissau. I've heard it's a tropical paradise with a climate that's perfect for beach lovers.
Ah, yes. Guinea-Bissau is, indeed, a tropical gem. But don't let its laid-back vibe fool you. The climate can be quite unpredictable, especially during the rainy season. I've heard that the country experiences a significant amount of rainfall, with some areas receiving over 4. So I think that we can talk for that.
Well, that's a lot of rain. I can imagine it would be a challenge to build infrastructure that can withstand such heavy rainfall. But I've also heard that the dry season in Guinea-Bissau is quite pleasant, with mild temperatures and plenty of sunshine.
Exactly. And that's what makes Guinea-Bissau such a great destination for ecotourism. The country's unique geography, with its mix of savannas, forests, and coastlines, creates a diverse range of ecosystems that are perfect for exploring. And, of course, the local people are incredibly warm and welcoming, just like the climate.
I love how you always manage to inject a bit of humor into our conversations, Leo. But the climate in both countries is quite different, and it's fascinating to see how the people adapt to these conditions.
Ah, yes. And that's where the real story begins, in the way people live in harmony with their environment. For example, in China, the ancient Silk Road cities like Xi'an and Luoyang have developed unique architectural styles that are designed to withstand the extreme weather conditions.
That's so cool. I've always been fascinated by the history of the Silk Road, and how it connected different cultures and civilizations. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the cultural adaptations in Guinea-Bissau, like the way the people use traditional medicine to treat illnesses related to the climate.
Yes. The traditional medicine in Guinea-Bissau is indeed fascinating. And it's a great example of how the local people have developed unique ways to cope with the challenges of the climate. But I think what's even more interesting is the way the climate has shaped the local cuisine. For example, the use of palm oil and other local ingredients to create delicious dishes that are perfect for the tropical climate.
That sounds delicious. And I'm sure our listeners would love to try some of those dishes. But let's talk about the impact of climate change on both countries. I've heard that China is experiencing more frequent and severe weather events, like droughts and floods, which are affecting agriculture and food security.
Yes. That's a major concern, and it's something that we should all be paying attention to. But I think what's even more worrying is the impact of climate change on Guinea-Bissau, which is already one of the most vulnerable countries in the world. The country is experiencing more frequent and severe storms, which are affecting the fishing industry and food security.
Well, that's devastating. I'm sure our listeners would agree with me that climate change is a major concern for both countries, and it's essential that we take action to mitigate its effects.
Yes. And that's where we can all play a role, by being more aware of our carbon footprint and making conscious choices to reduce our impact on the environment. And, of course, by supporting organizations that are working to protect the environment and promote sustainable development in both countries.
Exactly. And I think that's a great note to end on. I'm sure our listeners will appreciate this informative and engaging conversation about climate and seasonal conditions in China and Guinea-Bissau.
Thank you, Mira. And to our listeners, I'm curious, what do you think about the climate and seasonal conditions in these two countries? Do you have any experiences or insights to share?
So, when it comes to food culture, China and Guinea-Bissau offer vastly different culinary experiences. I mean, in China, you have the incredible variety of regional cuisines, from Sichuan hot pot to Cantonese dim sum.
Yes. And let's not forget the spicy kick of Sichuan pepper. I'm a big fan of that.
Well, I'm a fan of spicy food too. But I have to say, I find the concept of hot pot fascinating. It's like a communal experience, where everyone gathers around the table and cooks their own food together.
That's so true. And in China, you can find hot pot restaurants in almost every city. But I have to ask, Mira, have you ever tried the street food in China?
Oh, yes. I've had my fair share of street food in China, and it's always an adventure. From the stinky tofu to the fried insects. It's a whole new world of flavors.
Well, I've had my fair share of street food in China too. But I have to say, I'm a bit of a wimp when it comes to spicy food.
Oh, come on. Leo, you can't be a wimp when it comes to spicy food.
Hey, I'm not a wimp. I just prefer to savor the flavors without, setting my taste buds on fire.
Okay. But, seriously, the food in China is incredible. And, did you know that China is also one of the largest producers of organic food in the world?
Ah, really? I didn't know that. That's fascinating.
Yes, and it's not just about the quantity, but also the quality. Chinese organic farmers are really pushing the boundaries when it comes to sustainable agriculture.
That's great to hear. Now, let's talk about Guinea-Bissau. What can you tell us about the food culture there?
Well, Guinea-Bissau has a rich culinary heritage, with a focus on traditional dishes like arroz de pescado and cal, ulu.
That sounds delicious. And I have to ask, Mira, have you ever tried the traditional Guinean dish, mandingue?
Ah, yes. Mandingue is a staple in Guinea-Bissau, and it's made from a type of root called cassava. It's a bit bland, but it's a great source of carbohydrates.
Bland? Really? I've had mandingue before, and I think it's actually quite tasty.
Oh, Leo, you're such a foodie. But, seriously, the food in Guinea-Bissau is amazing, and it's all about community and sharing.
That's so true. And I think that's one of the things that's missing in modern society, the sense of community and sharing that comes with traditional food.
Absolutely. And did you know that Guinea-Bissau is one of the countries with the highest consumption of fish per capita?
Wow, that's impressive. And I have to ask, Mira? What's the secret to Guinean cuisine?
Well, I think the secret is in the spices and the way the food is prepared. Guinean cuisine is all about simplicity and letting the natural flavors shine through.
Ah, I see. And I think that's one of the things that's missing in modern cuisine, the simplicity and the focus on natural flavors.
Exactly. And I'm curious, Leo, what do you think about the idea of food as a form of cultural exchange?
Ah, I think it's a fantastic idea. Food has the power to bring people together and create a sense of community.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that's missing in modern society, the sense of community and connection that comes with sharing food. If you're interested in learning more about Guinean cuisine, we have a great recipe for mandingue in the show notes. China is home to some of the most impressive ancient landmarks in the world. Don't you think? Leo? The Great Wall, the Terracotta Army, and the Forbidden City are just a few examples of its rich history. Jet off. I would love to help us explore these incredible sites, and I'm sure our listeners would too.
Absolutely. Mira, China's history is steeped in mystery and intrigue. The Terracotta Army, for instance, is a testament to the ingenuity and craftsmanship of the ancient Chinese. I mean, who wouldn't want to see thousands of life-sized soldiers standing guard? It's like something out of a fantasy movie.
And the Forbidden City. Oh, my goodness. It's like a palace of wonders. The intricate carvings, the stunning architecture, and the rich history all come together to create an experience that's truly unforgettable. Jet off. Aya has some amazing resources on the Forbidden City. By the way, have you checked them out?
I have. Mira, and I must say, they're fantastic. But let's talk about something a bit more modern, shall we? China has a thriving art scene, with some of the most talented artists in the world. From traditional calligraphy to modern installations, Chinese art is a true reflection of the country's cultural diversity. What do you think? Mira, have you seen any of the contemporary art exhibitions in China?
Actually, Leah, I have. and I was blown away by the creativity and innovation on display. But I have to say, I'm curious about Guinea-Bissau's cultural heritage. Have you heard about the rich musical traditions of this West African country? I has some amazing articles on the history of Guinea-Bissau's music, and I think our listeners would love to learn more about it.
Ah, yes. Guinea-Bissau's music is indeed a treasure trove of cultural riches. The country's unique blend of Portuguese and African influences has created a truly distinctive sound. And have you heard about the famous Guinea-Bissauan singer, Bissau Guinean? His music is like a fusion of traditional and modern styles, and it's absolutely captivating.
That's so cool. Leo, I can see why you'd be interested in Guinea-Bissau's music, but let's talk about something more specific, shall we? What do you think about the cultural significance of the ancient city of Bissau? I've heard it's a real treasure trove of history and culture.
Ah, yes. Bissau is indeed a fascinating city, rich in history and cultural significance. The city's architecture, for instance, reflects the blending of Portuguese and African styles, creating a unique and fascinating cultural landscape. And have you heard about the famous Bissauan poet, Antonio Cabral? His poetry is like a window into the soul of the city, and it's truly captivating.
Wow, Leo, you're really knowledgeable about Guinea-Bissau's cultural heritage. I'm impressed. But let's talk about something more lighthearted, shall we? What do you think about a traditional Guinean dish, kalulu? I've heard it's a real treat, and I'm curious about your thoughts on it.
Kalulu. Yes, it's a classic Guinean dish. And I must say, it's absolutely delicious. The combination of rice, fish, and spices is like a taste sensation. And it's definitely worth trying. And have you heard about the famous Guinean festival? The Festa do Senhor Santo Cristo dos Milagres is a real spectacle, with music, dance, and food galore.
That sounds amazing. Leo, I'm so glad we're exploring the cultural heritage of both China and Guinea-Bissau. It's fascinating to see how different cultures can come together and create something truly unique. And I'm sure our listeners are loving this criterion as much as we are.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I must say, I'm loving the connection we're making between these two countries. From the ancient landmarks of China to the vibrant music and culture of Guinea-Bissau. It's like a journey through time and space. And get off. AI is the perfect partner for this journey, don't you think?
I couldn't agree more. Leo, and I'm so glad we're ending this criterion on a high note. It's been an absolute pleasure exploring the historical, cultural, and artistic values of China and Guinea-Bissau with you. Let's talk about the stunning natural beauties of China and Guinea-Bissau. From the majestic mountains to the serene coastlines, these countries have some of the most breathtaking landscapes on the planet. I'm curious. Leo, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of China's natural scenery?
China's natural beauty is truly awe-inspiring. For me, it's the breathtaking scenery of the Li River in Guilin, with its towering karst mountains and crystal-clear waters. It's like a painting come to life. But, I have to say, I'm also a bit curious about Guinea-Bissau's coastline. Have you heard of the stunning beaches of Orongo National Park?
Yes, I have. Orongo National Park is home to some of the most pristine and untouched beaches in the world. And, if I'm not mistaken, it's also a nesting ground for the endangered green turtle. But, let's get back to China. What do you think is the most unique aspect of China's natural scenery?
That's a great question. I think what makes China's natural scenery so unique is the incredible diversity of landscapes. From the towering Himalayas to the vast deserts of the Gobi, China has it all. And, of course, the iconic Yangtze River, which is the longest river in Asia and flows through some of the most stunning scenery in the country.
Wow, that's so true. The Yangtze River is indeed one of China's most iconic natural wonders. And, speaking of natural wonders, have you heard about the stunning scenery of the Guiana Shield in Guinea-Bissau? It's home to some of the most pristine rainforests and waterfalls in the world.
The Guinea Shield is a treasure trove of natural wonders. But I have to say, I'm also fascinated by China's famous Terrataka Army. Have you ever been to the Terrataka Army Museum in Zion? It's an incredible experience, with thousands of life-size Terrataka soldiers on display.
Oh, I've been to the Terrataka Army Museum, and it's indeed an incredible experience. But let's get back to the natural scenery. I think what's really unique about Guinea-Bissau is the fact that it's home to some of the most remote and untouched natural landscapes in the world. Have you ever heard of the stunning scenery of the Bijagós Islands?
Ah, yes. The Bijagós Islands are a hidden gem, with their pristine beaches, crystal clear waters, and lush tropical forests. And speaking of tropical forests, have you heard about the incredible biodiversity of the tropical forests of China's Hainan Island? It's a real treasure trove of natural wonders.
Wow, that's so true. Hainan Island is indeed a natural wonderland, with its lush tropical forests, towering mountains, and crystal clear waters. And speaking of waters, let's talk about the stunning coastline of China. What do you think is the most beautiful aspect of China's coastline?
That's a tough question. But if I had to choose, I'd say it's the stunning scenery of the coastal city of Qingdao. The combination of the blue waters, the lush mountains, and the historic architecture is simply breathtaking.
Qingdao is indeed a beautiful city. And speaking of beautiful cities, have you ever heard about the charming city of Bissau in Guinea-Bissau? It's a real gem, with its colorful markets, historic architecture, and stunning natural scenery.
Yes. Bissau is indeed a charming city, with its rich history and culture. And speaking of culture, have you heard about the incredible traditional festivals of China? The Lantern Festival, the Dragon Boat Festival, and the Mid-Autumn Festival are just a few examples of the many colorful festivals that take place in China.
Wow, that's so true. China's traditional festivals are indeed a real treat, with their colorful parades, delicious food, and stunning natural scenery. And speaking of food, let's talk about the delicious cuisine of Guinea-Bissau. What do you think is the most unique aspect of Guinea-Bissau's cuisine?
That's a great question. I think what makes Guinea-Bissau's cuisine so unique is the incredible combination of African, Portuguese, and Brazilian influences. The dishes are a real fusion of flavors and cultures.
That's so true. The cuisine of Guinea-Bissau is indeed a fusion of flavors and cultures. And speaking of flavors, have you ever tried the delicious Chinese cuisine of Hainan Island? It's a real treat, with its fresh seafood, exotic spices, and stunning natural scenery.
Yes. The cuisine of Hainan Island is indeed a real treat, with its fresh seafood, exotic spices, and stunning natural scenery. And speaking of scenery, let's talk about the stunning landscapes of China. What do you think is the most unique aspect of China's landscapes?
That's a tough question. But if I had to choose, I'd say it's the stunning scenery of the Tibetan Plateau, the towering mountains, the crystal clear lakes, and the vast grasslands are simply breathtaking.
The Tibetan Plateau is indeed a breathtaking landscape. And speaking of breathtaking landscapes, have you ever heard about the stunning scenery of the Guinea-Bissau's Bijagós Islands? It's a real treasure trove of natural wonders.
Yes. The Bijagós Islands are indeed a treasure trove of natural wonders, with their pristine beaches, crystal clear waters, and lush tropical forests. And speaking of forests, let's talk about the incredible biodiversity of China's forests. What do you think is the most unique aspect of China's forests?
That's a great question. I think what makes China's forests so unique is the incredible diversity of tree species, from the towering cedars of the north to the lush mangroves of the south. China's forests are a real treasure trove of natural wonders.
Wow, that's so true. China's forests are indeed a real treasure trove of natural wonders. And speaking of natural wonders, let's talk about the stunning natural scenery of Guinea-Bissau. What do you think is the most unique aspect of Guinea-Bissau's natural scenery?
That's a tough question. But if I had to choose, I'd say it's the stunning scenery of the Seradal and Hay mountain range. The towering mountains, the crystal clear lakes, and the lush tropical forests are simply breathtaking.
The Seradine and Hay mountain range is indeed a breathtaking landscape. And speaking of breathtaking landscapes, have you ever heard about the stunning scenery of China's Shanghai National Forest Park? It's a real treasure trove of natural wonders.
Yes. Shanghai National Forest Park is indeed a treasure TRO.
So, let's talk about sports in China and Guinea-Bissau. I'm curious, Leo, have you ever tried any of the traditional Chinese martial arts like Tai Chi or Kung Fu?
Actually, I've tried to imitate some Kung Fu moves in a bar, but I think I ended up doing more harm than good. I'm more of a spectator when it comes to martial arts.
Oh, I can imagine. Well, in China, martial arts are not only a form of exercise, but also a way of life. And speaking of exercise, I'm sure our listeners would love to know about the sports facilities in China. How do you think they compare to those in Guinea-Bissau?
That's a tough one. China has some amazing sports facilities, especially in major cities like Beijing and Shanghai. But Guinea-Bissau, being a smaller country, might not have the same level of infrastructure. I'm sure it's still a great place for outdoor enthusiasts. So,
That's a good point. Leo, Guinea-Bissau does have a lot to offer when it comes to outdoor activities, and I'm sure our listeners would love to know about the surfing and fishing opportunities in the country. Have you ever tried surfing? Leo?
me? Surfing? I think I need a few lessons first. But seriously, I've heard that Guinea-Bissau has some amazing beaches and coastal areas that are perfect for water sports.
Exactly. And speaking of water sports, have you ever tried dragon boat racing in China? It's a traditional sport that's been around for centuries.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of fun. I've seen videos of dragon boat racing before, and it looks like an exhilarating experience. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about it.
Well, let's talk about it then. Dragon boat racing is not only a fun activity, but also a great way to get some exercise and experience Chinese culture. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that it's a great way to stay active and connected with nature.
Absolutely. And I'm sure our listeners would also love to know about the hiking and trekking opportunities in China. Have you ever been on a hike in the Chinese countryside? Mira?
Oh yes, I've been on several hikes in China, and I can tell you that the scenery is just breathtaking. From the Himalayas to the Karst Mountains in Guinea, China has some of the most beautiful landscapes in the world.
Wow, that sounds amazing! And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the trekking trails in China. Maybe we could even plan a podcast episode on that topic.
That sounds like a great idea. Leo, and speaking of great ideas, have you ever thought about visiting Guinea-Bissau for a surfing or fishing trip? I'm sure it would be an adventure of a lifetime.
Actually, I've been about it. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the surfing and fishing opportunities in Guinea-Bissau. Maybe we can even get some tips from our listeners who have visited the country before.
Exactly. And I'm sure our listeners would love to share their experiences and tips with us. So, let's open up the discussion and hear from our listeners. Have you ever visited Guinea-Bissau or China for a sports or adventure activity? Share your experiences with us in the comments below.
Absolutely. And don't forget to follow us on social media for more exciting content and updates on our podcast. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like to discuss, feel free to reach out to us. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future episodes. Until next time, stay active and keep on adventuring. I'm sure our listeners are curious about the nightlife scene in China and Guinea-Bissau. Let's start with China's vibrant cities. where you can find everything from electric clubs to captivating theaters and festive events. I'm curious, Leo, have you ever been to a traditional Chinese opera performance?
Yes, I have. It was a hilarious experience, with the opera singers shouting and flailing their arms. I couldn't help but laugh at the dramatic performances. But, I have to say, China's nightlife has come a long way since then. Now, you can find everything from trendy bars to rooftop clubs in cities like Shanghai and Beijing.
That's true. China's urban areas are indeed very lively, especially during festivals like the Chinese New Year. But what about Guinea-Bissau? I've heard it has a more laid-back and traditional vibe. Have you ever been to a traditional Bissau Guinean festival? Leo?
Actually, I have. It was a fascinating experience, with the locals dancing and singing to traditional music. But, I have to say, the nightlife in Guinea-Bissau is quite different from China's. It's more low-key, with a focus on traditional music and dance. But, it's still a great way to experience the local culture.
That's interesting. I've heard that Guinea-Bissau has a rich musical heritage, with a mix of traditional and modern influences. I'm curious, Leo, have you ever tried any of the local music and dance traditions?
Yes. I've even tried to learn some of the local dances, but I'm not very good at it. But, seriously, the music and dance in Guinea-Bissau are incredible. It's a great way to experience the local culture and connect with the people.
Well, I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the music and dance traditions in Guinea-Bissau. Let's talk more about the nightlife scene in China and Guinea-Bissau. What do you think is the biggest difference between the two countries' nightlife scenes? Leo?
That's a great question. I think the biggest difference is the level of commercialization. China's nightlife is very commercialized, with many bars and clubs catering to tourists. In contrast, Guinea-Bissau's nightlife is more traditional and local focused.
That's a great point. Leo, China's nightlife is indeed very commercialized, with many bars and clubs trying to attract tourists. But what about the local nightlife scene in China? Is it still possible to experience authentic Chinese culture in the evenings?
Yes. While China's nightlife is very commercialized, it's still possible to experience authentic Chinese culture in the evenings. You just need to look for the right places, like traditional tea houses or local bars that serve traditional Chinese snacks.
That's a great tip. Leo, I'll definitely keep that in mind when visiting China. And what about Guinea-Bissau? Are there any local bars or clubs that serve traditional snacks and drinks?
Yes. There are many local bars and clubs in Guinea-Bissau that serve traditional snacks and drinks. In fact, some of the best places to experience the local culture are the small, family-owned bars and restaurants that serve traditional Bissau Guinean cuisine.
That sounds like a great way to experience the local culture. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the best places to experience traditional Bissau Guinean cuisine. Let's talk more about the nightlife scene in China and Guinea-Bissau. What do you think is the biggest misconception about the nightlife scene in Guinea-Bissau? Leo?
That's a great question. I think the biggest misconception is that Guinea-Bissau's nightlife is boring and uneventful. But the truth is, the nightlife in Guinea-Bissau is very vibrant and lively, with many festivals and events throughout the year.
That's a great point. Leo, Guinea-Bissau's nightlife is indeed very vibrant and lively, with many festivals and events throughout the year. And what about China? Are there any misconceptions about the nightlife scene in China that you'd like to debunk?
Yes. One misconception is that China's nightlife is only for young people. But the truth is, China's nightlife is for people of all ages, with many bars and clubs catering to families and older adults.
That's a great point. Leo, China's nightlife is indeed very family-friendly, with many bars and clubs catering to families and older adults. And what about Guinea-Bissau? Are there any family-friendly bars or clubs that we should check out?
Yes. There are many family-friendly bars and clubs in Guinea-Bissau that serve traditional snacks and drinks. In fact, Some of the best places to experience the local culture are the small, family-owned bars and restaurants that serve traditional Bissau Guinean cuisine.
That sounds like a great way to experience the local culture. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the best places to experience traditional Bissau Guinean cuisine. Let's talk more about the nightlife scene in China and Guinea-Bissau. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing the nightlife scene in Guinea-Bissau? Leo?
That's a great question. I think the biggest challenge facing the nightlife scene in Guinea-Bissau is the lack of infrastructure and resources. Many of the bars and clubs in Guinea-Bissau are small and family-owned, and they often struggle to access resources and funding to improve their facilities and services.
That's a great point. Leo, Guinea-Bissau's nightlife does face many challenges, including the lack of infrastructure and resources. But what about China? Are there any challenges facing the nightlife scene in China that we should be aware of?
Yes. One challenge facing the nightlife scene in China is the increasing commercialization of the industry. Many bars and clubs in China are now owned by large corporations, which can make it difficult for small, family-owned businesses to compete.
That's a great point. Leo, China's nightlife does face many challenges, including the increasing commercialization of the industry. And what about Guinea-Bissau? Are there any solutions to the challenges facing the nightlife scene in Guinea-Bissau that you'd like to propose?
Yes. One solution is to support local businesses and entrepreneurs who are working to improve the nightlife scene in Guinea-Bissau. By supporting these businesses, we can help them access the resources and funding they need to improve their facilities and services.
That's a great idea. Leah, supporting local businesses and entrepreneurs is a great way to promote economic development and improve the nightlife scene in Guinea-Bissau. And what about China? Are there any solutions to the challenges facing the nightlife scene in China that you'd like to propose?
Yes. One solution is to promote sustainable and responsible.
I'm so to dive into the family-friendly environments and children's activities in China and Guinea-Bissau. Let's start with China, shall we? I've heard that China has some amazing theme parks that are perfect for families.
Yes. China's got some incredible theme parks. But I've also heard that they're getting a bit too commercialized. I mean, have you seen the lines for Shanghai Disneyland? It's like a never-ending queue.
Well, I'm sure it's still a lot of fun for the kids. But let's talk about something more unique, like the ancient Chinese traditions that are still celebrated today. For example, the Lantern Festival is a beautiful event that's perfect for families to enjoy together.
That's a great point, Mira. And speaking of festivals, Guinea-Bissau has its own unique celebrations like the Festa do Divino Espirito Santo, which is a beautiful display of music, dance, and food.
I've heard that the Festa do Divino Espirito Santo is a real treat for the senses. But let's get back to China for a moment. I've heard that Chinese families place a lot of emphasis on education and often have multiple generations living together.
Yes. That's a common practice in many Asian cultures. But I've also heard that Guinea-Bissau has a strong tradition of family support and community involvement, which is really beautiful to see.
That's so true, Leo. And I think that's one of the things that makes Guinea-Bissau such a great place for families. The community is so tight-knit and supportive. It's like one big happy family.
Well, I think we can both agree that both China and Guinea-Bissau have a lot to offer families in terms of culture, tradition, and community. But let's talk about something more practical, like childcare options. What's it like for families with young children in China?
That's a great question. In China, there are many childcare options available, from nurseries to after-school programs. But I've heard that the quality can vary greatly depending on the location and the specific program.
That's true. Mira. But I've also heard that Guinea-Bissau has a strong tradition of family care, where grandparents and other relatives often take on child care responsibilities.
That's so beautiful, Leo. And I think that's something that we can all learn from. But let's get back to China for a moment. I've heard that Chinese families often prioritize education and extracurriculars for their children.
Yes. That's a common practice in many Asian cultures. But I've also heard that Guinea-Bissau places a strong emphasis on outdoor activities and play-based learning, which is really wonderful to see.
I think that's one of the things that makes Guinea-Bissau such a great place for families. The natural beauty and outdoor spaces are just incredible.
Well, I think we can both agree that both China and Guinea-Bissau have a lot to offer families in terms of culture, tradition, and community. And I'm curious, Mira, have you ever been to a theme park in China?
Oh, no. I haven't. But I've heard it's a lot of fun. Maybe one day I'll get to experience it for myself.
Well, I'm sure it'll be a real adventure. But in the meantime, let's talk about something more practical, like child care options in Guinea-Bissau.
Ah, that's a great idea. Leo, and I think it's something that our listeners would be really interested in. And dive in and explore the child care options in Guinea-Bissau.
Sounds like a plan. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners will appreciate the information.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Guinea-Bissau would agree with me that the community is very supportive and family-friendly.
Well, I think we can both agree that both China and Guinea-Bissau have a lot to offer families in terms of culture, tradition, and community.
And I think that's one of the things that makes Guinea-Bissau such a great place for families. The community is so tight-knit and supportive. It's like one big happy family.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, Mira. But before we wrap up, I just want to ask our listeners, what do you think is the most family-friendly aspect of China or Guinea-Bissau?
That's a great question, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners will have some great insights to share.
Well, let's hear from them. Then,
China's vibrant Pride events are a testament to its evolving LGBT-friendly atmosphere. From the iconic Beijing Pride to the Shanghai Pride Parade, these events showcase the country's growing acceptance of diversity.
I've heard that the Chinese government has taken steps to improve LGBT rights, but it's still a work in progress. What's your take on the situation, Mira?
Well, Leo, while there's been progress, it's essential to acknowledge the complexities of China's LGBT landscape. The government's stance on same-sex marriage and adoption is still ambiguous, and there's a long way to go in terms of full acceptance.
That's true. But I've also heard that some Chinese cities, like Shanghai and Beijing, have more open-minded attitudes towards LGBT individuals. What's your experience with the local communities in these cities?
Yes. I've had the chance to interact with some amazing LGBT communities in Shanghai and Beijing. They're incredibly resilient and resourceful, and it's heartening to see how they're pushing for change.
I'm curious, Mira, have you noticed any differences between the attitudes towards LGBT individuals in urban versus rural areas of China?
Actually, Leo, I think there's a significant divide between the two. Urban areas tend to be more cosmopolitan and accepting, while rural areas can be more traditional and conservative.
That's fascinating. I've also heard that Guinea-Bissau, our second country, has a more relaxed attitude towards LGBT individuals. Can you tell us more about the LGBT scene in Guinea-Bissau, Mira?
Oh, yes. Guinea-Bissau is indeed a country with a relatively open-minded attitude towards LGBT individuals. The local communities are warm and welcoming, and it's not uncommon to see same-sex couples holding hands in public.
Wow, that's amazing! I've also heard that Guinea-Bissau has a strong tradition of tolerance and acceptance. How does that impact the LGBT community in the country?
Well, Leo, I think the strong tradition of tolerance and acceptance in Guinea-Bissau has created a safe space for LGBT individuals to express themselves without fear of persecution. It's truly inspiring to see.
That's fantastic. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the LGBT-friendly atmosphere in these two countries. Do you think our listeners living in China would agree that the government's stance on LGBT rights is still ambiguous?
I'm certain that our listeners living in China would agree with me. But it's essential to acknowledge the complexities of the issue and the progress that's been made.
Absolutely. And what about our listeners in Guinea-Bissau? Do you think they would agree that the country has a relatively open-minded attitude towards LGBT individuals?
I'm sure they would. The local communities in Guinea-Bissau are indeed warm and welcoming, and it's not uncommon to see same-sex couples holding hands in public.
That's great to hear. I think it's essential to highlight the unique experiences of each country and community. Can you tell us more about the cultural attitudes towards LGBT individuals in Guinea-Bissau? Mira?
Yes. Guinea-Bissau has a rich cultural heritage, and the local communities place a strong emphasis on tolerance and acceptance. It's truly heartening to see how the country is embracing diversity.
That's wonderful to hear. I think it's essential to acknowledge the progress that's been made in both countries and to continue pushing for full acceptance and equality.
Absolutely, Leo. And I think it's also essential to acknowledge the challenges that still lie ahead. But with the support of communities like ours, I'm confident that we can create a more inclusive and accepting world for all.
Well said, Mira. And I think it's essential to thank our listeners for joining us on this journey of discovery. If you have any thoughts or comments, please let us know in the comments section below.
And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more content on LGBT-friendly atmospheres and inclusive communities around the world.
Thanks again, Mira, for your insights and expertise on this topic. It's been a pleasure discussing the LGBT-friendly atmosphere in China and Guinea-Bissau with you.
The pleasure is mine, Leah. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay informed, stay connected, and keep spreading love and acceptance. China is known for its warm and welcoming culture. But there's one aspect that fascinates me, the concept of gumshi, or relationships, built on trust and mutual support. If you're a foreigner in China, you'll often find locals eager to help. But it's also essential to understand these complex relationships.
Guernsey is indeed a vital part of Chinese culture, but I'd say Guinea-Bissau has its own unique take on hospitality. In West Africa, you'll find that locals often greet you with a warm smile and a firm handshake. The Bissau Guinean concept of solidarity emphasizes community and shared responsibility, making foreigners feel part of the family.
That's a beautiful approach to community building. I've heard that in China, foreigners often face challenges adapting to the language barrier. But with the help of locals, it can be easier to navigate everyday life. Have you had any experiences with language barriers in Guinea-Bissau?
Yes, language can be a challenge in Guinea-Bissau, but the locals are often willing to help. I've had friends who've learned some Portuguese and Creole, and it's amazing how far a smile and a few words can get you. Plus, the expat community is relatively small, so you're more likely to make connections and find support.
I'm certain that our listeners living in China would agree with me that learning a few key phrases in Mandarin can go a long way in building relationships. It's not just about communication. It's about showing respect for the culture. Do you think that's also true in Guinea-Bissau?
Absolutely. In Guinea-Bissau, learning some basic Creole and Portuguese phrases can make a huge difference. It's not just about being polite. It's about demonstrating your willingness to learn and adapt. And trust me, the locals will appreciate your effort.
I've heard that in China, there are many resources available for foreigners to learn Mandarin, from language classes to online resources. Have you found any similar resources in Guinea-Bissau?
Actually, I found that the expat community in Guinea-Bissau is quite active. And there are many online forums and groups where you can connect with other foreigners and learn about local customs and language. Plus, the locals are often eager to share their knowledge and help you navigate the culture.
That's great to hear. I'm curious. What do you think are some common misconceptions that foreigners might have about China's hospitality?
I think one common misconception is that China is a very formal and strict culture. While it's true that there are certain protocols to follow, the reality is that many Chinese people are warm and welcoming, especially once you've built a relationship with them.
I agree. And I think it's essential for foreigners to understand the importance of gumshi in building relationships in China. But what about Guinea-Bissau? Are there any specific cultural norms that foreigners should be aware of?
Yes, one thing to keep in mind is that Guinea-Bissau has a strong tradition of community and shared responsibility. When interacting with locals, it's essential to show respect for the community and the elders. And don't be afraid to ask for help or guidance. The locals will appreciate your willingness to learn.
That's great advice. And I think it's essential for our listeners to understand that building relationships in both China and Guinea-Bissau requires patience, empathy, and a willingness to learn. If you have any tips or experiences to share, please let us know in the comments below.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth mentioning that both China and Guinea-Bissau offer unique opportunities for cultural exchange and learning, whether it's through language classes, cultural events, or simply interacting with locals. There are many ways to build bridges across cultures.
I couldn't agree more. And finally, I'd like to ask our listeners, what do you think are some key differences between China's and Guinea-Bissau's approaches to hospitality? Do you have any experiences or tips to share?
I think one key difference is the level of formality in China versus the more relaxed and informal nature of Guinea-Bissau's culture. But ultimately, both countries offer unique opportunities for building relationships and experiencing warm hospitality.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you, Leo, for sharing your insights on hospitality in China and Guinea-Bissau. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this conversation. If you have any further questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you, Mira, for the opportunity to share my thoughts. And to our listeners, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation and will continue to explore the rich cultural heritage of China and Guinea-Bissau.
So, when it comes to internet infrastructure and digital facilities, China is a force to be reckoned with. They've got some of the fastest internet speeds in the world, with many cities offering gigabit connectivity. And let's not forget about the tech hubs like Shenzhen and Shanghai, which are basically digital nomad paradises.
That's right. Mira, China's internet infrastructure is incredibly developed, with widespread high-speed connectivity and a plethora of digital services. But what about Guinea-Bissau? I'm curious to know how their internet infrastructure stacks up against China's.
Guinea-Bissau. Well, let's just say they're a digital laggard compared to China. But, in all seriousness, they do have some initiatives in place to improve their internet connectivity, like the Guinea-Bissau fiber optic project.
Fiber optic project? Huh? That sounds promising. But I'm guessing it's still a long way off from matching China's speeds and services. I mean, China's got some of the most advanced digital infrastructure in the world, from their 5G networks to their artificial intelligence research.
Exactly. China's got a real head start when it comes to digital infrastructure. But what about the human side of things? I'm curious to know how people in Guinea-Bissau use the internet, and what kind of digital divide exists there.
Great point. Mira, the human side of things is just as important as the infrastructure itself. I've heard that in Guinea-Bissau, many people still rely on mobile phones for internet access, rather than fixed-line connections. And with limited internet penetration, it's not surprising that digital literacy is a major issue.
That's really interesting, Leah. And I think it's worth noting that China has also made significant strides in digital literacy, with initiatives like the China Internet Development Report. But I'm curious to know more about Guinea-Bissau's approach to digital literacy.
Well, Mira, it seems that Guinea-Bissau has been working to improve digital literacy through programs like the Guinea-Bissau Digital Literacy Initiative. But I'm guessing it's still a long way off from matching China's level of digital sophistication.
I see what you mean. But I think it's worth noting that Guinea-Bissau has some unique cultural and linguistic challenges when it comes to digital literacy. For example, the official language of Guinea-Bissau is Portuguese, which is different from the languages spoken in China.
That's a great point. Mira, language barriers can definitely pose a challenge when it comes to digital literacy. But I'm curious to know more about China's approach to digital literacy and how they're addressing issues like language barriers.
Well, Leo, China has been working to address language barriers through initiatives like the China Language and Culture Institute. But I'm curious to know more about Guinea-Bissau's approach to digital literacy and how they're working to improve internet access for rural communities.
Great question. Mira, I've heard that Guinea-Bissau has been working to improve internet access in rural areas through initiatives like the Rural Internet Access Project. But I'm guessing it's still a long way off from matching China's level of digital infrastructure.
I see what you mean, Leo. But I think it's worth noting that Guinea-Bissau has some unique cultural and historical context when it comes to digital infrastructure. For example, the country has a long history of resistance to colonialism, which has shaped their approach to digital infrastructure.
That's a great point. Mira, cultural and historical context can definitely play a role in shaping a country's approach to digital infrastructure. But I'm curious to know more about China's approach to digital infrastructure and how they're working to address issues like cybercausatia.
Well, Leo, China has been working to address cybercausatia issues through initiatives like the China Cybercausatia Protection Law. But I'm curious to know more about Guinea-Bissau's approach to cybercausatia and how they're working to protect their digital infrastructure.
Great question. Mira, I've heard that Guinea-Bissau has been working to improve cyber partnerships with international organizations like the United Nations. But I'm guessing it's still a long way off from matching China's level of digital sophistication.
I see what you mean, Leo. But I think it's worth noting that Guinea-Bissau has some unique challenges when it comes to cybercausatia, like limited resources and infrastructure. But I'm curious to know more about China's approach to cybercausatia and how they're working to address issues like cyberacma.
Great point. Mira, China has been working to address cyberacma through initiatives like the China Cyberacma and Security Law. But I'm curious to know more about Guinea-Bissau's approach to cybercausatia and how they're working to protect their digital infrastructure.
Well, Leo, it seems that both China and Guinea-Bissau have unique challenges when it comes to digital infrastructure and cybercausatia. But I'm curious to know what our listeners think about this. If you have any thoughts or experiences to share, please let us know in the comments.
Absolutely. Mira, I think it's worth noting that both China and Guinea-Bissau have made significant progress in recent years when it comes to digital infrastructure and cybercausatia. But there's still much work to be done to address the digital divide and improve internet access for rural communities.
That's a great point, Leo. And I think it's worth noting that Guinea-Bissau has some unique opportunities to learn from China's experience in digital infrastructure and cybercausatia.
I see what you mean. Mia, China's experience in digital infrastructure and cybercausatia could definitely provide valuable lessons for Guinea-Bissau as they work to improve their own digital landscape.
Well, Leo, it seems that both China and Guinea-Bissau have much to learn from each other when it comes to digital infrastructure and cybercausatia. And I think it's worth noting that our listeners can play a crucial role in shaping the future of digital infrastructure and cybercausatia in both countries.
Absolutely. Mira, I think it's worth noting that our listeners can provide valuable insights and perspectives on how to arrest the digital divide and improve internet access for rural communities.
Well, Leo, it seems that we've covered a lot of ground when it comes to internet infrastructure and digital facilities in China and Guinea-Bissau. But I'm curious to know what our listeners think about this topic. Do you have any thoughts or experiences to share?
Great question. Mira, I think it's worth noting that both China and Guinea-Bissau have unique challenges and opportunities when it comes to digital infrastructure and cybercausatia. And I think our listeners can provide valuable insights and perspectives on how to address these issues.
Have you ever been to China? The shopping scene there is just incredible. You can find everything from affordable souvenirs to high-end designer goods.
Yes. China's retail landscape is vast and varied. From bustling markets like the famous Silk Market in Beijing to sprawling malls like the IAPM in Shanghai. There's something for every budget and taste.
Exactly. And the prices? Oh my goodness. You can find some amazing deals on everything from electronics to clothing. I once bought a brand new phone for half the price it was selling for in the US.
That's impressive. But, of course, with great deals come some potential pitfalls. Counterfeit goods are a problem in China. so it's essential to be cautious when shopping, especially at markets.
Absolutely. But, you know, that's all part of the adventure, right? I love the thrill of the hunt, trying to find that perfect bargain. And let's be real, some of the fake goods can be quite convincing.
Yes, I've seen some pretty convincing knockoffs myself. But, in all seriousness, it's essential to be aware of the risks and do your research before making a purchase.
I completely agree. Actually, I'm curious about what our listeners think about this. Have any of you had any experiences with counterfeit goods in China?
Ah, yes. I'm sure some of our listeners have had their share of experiences. But let's move on to Guinea-Bissau, shall we? I'm curious to see how their shopping scene compares to China's.
Oh, yes. Let's do it. So, I've been reading about Guinea-Bissau's markets, and it seems like they're still quite traditional. You know, with stalls selling local handicrafts and fresh produce.
That sounds lovely. I've heard that the markets in Guinea-Bissau are a great place to find unique souvenirs and support local artisans.
Exactly. And I've also been told that the prices are generally quite reasonable. I mean, you can find some beautiful handmade crafts for just a few dollars.
Ah, yes. The prices in Guinea-Bissau seem to be much more affordable than in China. But, of course, that's not surprising given the two countries' economic differences.
Yes, exactly. And, actually, I'm certain that our listeners living in Guinea-Bissau would agree with me that the markets are a great place to find some amazing deals.
I'm sure they would. But, let's not forget about the shopping malls in Guinea-Bissau. I've heard that they're not as developed as China's, but they still offer a range of goods and services.
Oh, yes, that's true. And I've been told that some of the malls are even quite modern and well equipped. But, of course, the selection is not as vast as in China.
Yes, that's the trade-off, I suppose. But, overall, I think both countries have their own unique shopping experiences to offer.
Absolutely. I think it's essential to remember that shopping is not just about finding the best deals or the most fashionable goods. It's also about supporting local economies and artisans.
Ah, yes. That's a crucial point. And I think our listeners would agree with us that shopping can be a fun and rewarding experience, especially when done responsibly.
Exactly. And if you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Ah, yes. We're always eager to hear from our listeners. And before we move on to our next topic, I just want to say that shopping is a great way to experience the culture and traditions of a country.
Yes. That's so true. And actually, I'm curious about what our listeners think about this. Have any of you had any experiences with shopping in China or Guinea-Bissau?
Ah, yes. I'm sure some of our listeners have had some fascinating experiences. And, who knows, maybe we'll hear some of those stories in the comments.
Yes. Let's hope so. And, finally, let's just say that shopping is an adventure in and of itself. Whether you're in China or Guinea-Bissau, there's always something new to discover.
Ah, yes. That's the spirit of adventure, I suppose. And, before we move on, I just want to say that shopping is a great way to experience the diversity of cultures and traditions.
Exactly. And, with that, let's move on to our next topic. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you in the next episode. Hey, have you heard about the Lantern Festival in China? It's a stunning display of light and color, with millions of lanterns illuminating the streets and temples. It's like walking into a dream world.
Ah, yes. The Lantern Festival is one of China's most iconic celebrations. It's a time for families to come together, share food, and admire the beautiful lanterns. But what's even more fascinating is the history behind it. Did you know that the festival dates back to the Han Dynasty?
Well, I didn't know that. But what I love about the Lantern Festival is the way it brings people together. I'm sure our listeners living in China would agree with me that it's a truly magical experience.
Absolutely. And it's not just the Lantern Festival that's amazing. China has a rich cultural calendar, with numerous festivals and celebrations throughout the year. From the Chinese New Year to the Dragon Boat Festival, there's always something to look forward to.
That's so true. And speaking of festivals, have you heard about the Bissau Carnival in Guinea-Bissau? It's a vibrant celebration of music, dance, and culture.
Ah, yes. The Bijagós Carnival is a highlight of the year in Guinea-Bissau, with its colorful costumes, energetic rhythms, and lively street performances. It's a truly unforgettable experience.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think the Bissau Carnival is a more energetic celebration than the Lantern Festival?
Well, I think both festivals have their own unique energy. But if I had to choose, I'd say the Bijagós Carnival is definitely more high-octane. The music, the dance, the costumes, it's all just so infectious.
That's a great point. And speaking of music, have you heard about the growing music scene in China? With the rise of Chinese pop and rock, there's a whole new generation of musicians making waves in the industry.
Ah, yes. China has a thriving music scene, with a wide range of genres and styles to explore. From traditional folk music to modern electronic music, there's something for every taste.
And that's not all. China also has a rich cultural heritage, with numerous UNESCO-recognized sites like the Forbidden City and the Great Wall. These are truly breathtaking destinations that showcase the country's history and beauty.
Absolutely. And speaking of cultural heritage, Guinea-Bissau has its own unique treasures. From the stunning architecture of the São José Fort to the vibrant markets of Bissau, there's always something new to discover.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Guinea-Bissau would agree with me that the country has a rich cultural calendar. From the Festa do Avante to the Festival de Music à Bissau, there's always something to look forward to.
I think you're right, Mira. And speaking of festivals, I think it's worth mentioning that both China and Guinea-Bissau have a strong tradition of community-based celebrations, whether it's the Lantern Festival or the Bijagós Carnival. These events bring people together and create a sense of community and belonging.
That's so true. And I think that's one of the things that makes cultural events and festivals so special. They have the power to bring people together and create a sense of connection and shared experience.
Absolutely. And I think that's why it's so important to explore and learn about different cultural traditions. Whether it's through music, dance, or food, there's always something new to discover and enjoy.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for today's topic. But before we go, I want to say thank you to our listeners for joining us on this journey through cultural events and festivals in China and Guinea-Bissau. These insights could have been possible without Jetta referring to cultural trends.
And don't forget to check out our next episode, where we'll be exploring the world of food and drink in these two countries. Until then, keep on exploring and discovering the wonders of China and Guinea-Bissau.
So, let's talk about opportunities and ease of learning the local language in China and Guinea-Bissau. China, being a global hub, has invested heavily in language education, with thousands of language schools and programs catering to international students.
That's true, Mira. But have you ever tried to navigate the Chinese language learning landscape? It's a jungle out there. You've got HSK exams, language proficiency tests, and various teaching methods to choose from. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
Well, I think that's what makes it exciting, don't you? China's language education system is incredibly comprehensive, with a wide range of options for learners. And, of course, the popularity of Mandarin Chinese has led to an increase in language learning apps and online resources.
Yes, but have you tried using some of those apps? They're often geared towards beginners. But the more advanced you get, the more you realize that they're not quite up to par. I mean, I've seen some of them use outdated grammar rules or even make mistakes in their own language explanations.
Oh, Leah, you're such a language snob. But seriously, while online resources can be helpful, I think there's no substitute for immersive language learning. China has a rich cultural heritage, and immersing yourself in the language and customs can be a truly rewarding experience.
Absolutely. And speaking of cultural immersion, I think Guinea-Bissau has a lot to offer in this regard. The local language, Bialanta, is a beautiful and complex language that's still relatively unknown to outsiders.
That's true. Guinea-Bissau is a great example of a country where language learning can be a truly immersive experience. The local culture is still relatively untouched by modernity, and the language is a great window into the country's rich history and traditions.
Well, I think you're being a bit too romantic about it, Mira. But I do agree that Guinea-Bissau is a great place to learn a new language. The locals are incredibly warm and welcoming. And the language itself is a fascinating example of a Bantu language.
Oh, Leah, you're such a language enthusiast. But seriously, I think what makes Guinea-Bissau such a great place to learn a new language is the sense of community. When you're learning a language, it's not just about the language itself, but about the people and culture behind it.
Absolutely. And speaking of community, I think China has a lot to offer in this regard as well. The Chinese language has a rich cultural heritage, and there are countless resources available for language learners.
That's true. China is a great example of a country where language learning can be a truly social experience. The language itself is a great way to connect with locals and learn about their culture.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, Mira. But I have to say, I'm curious, what do you think our listeners think about the opportunities and ease of learning the local language in China and Guinea-Bissau?
Well, I'm sure they have a lot to say on the topic. And if you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments.
Oh, Mira, you're such a tease. But, seriously, I think we've provided a good overview of the opportunities and ease of learning the local language in both countries. Thanks for chatting with me about it. Mira.
The pleasure's all mine. Leo. And who knows, maybe our listeners will be inspired to learn a new language and experience the rich cultures of China and Guinea-Bissau for themselves.
Absolutely. And speaking of inspiration, I think we should wrap up this topic for now. But I'm sure our listeners will have plenty more to say on the topic.
Well, I'm sure they will. And if you want to continue the conversation, be sure to check out our next episode, where we'll be discussing the cuisine of China and Guinea-Bissau. It's going to be a real treat.
Mira, you're such a foodie. But seriously, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. Thanks for chatting with me about the opportunities and ease of learning the local language in China and Guinea-Bissau.
So, let's talk about safety and comfort for women travelers in China and Guinea-Bissau. I'm curious, Leo, have you traveled to either of these countries before?
Actually, I've been to China a few times, but Guinea-Bissau is still on my bucket list. However, I've heard it's quite challenging for tourists, especially women.
Yes, Guinea-Bissau is a bit off the beaten path, but I'm to share some insights about both countries. China, for instance, has made significant strides in promoting women's safety and rights. They've implemented strict laws against harassment and violence.
That's great to hear. Mira, I've noticed that Chinese cities are generally very safe, especially for women. But what about rural areas? I've heard stories of rural villages where women are still treated as second-class citizens.
Yes, that's true. Rural areas in China can be quite challenging for women, especially if they're not fluent in the local dialect. But overall, China has made significant progress in improving women's safety and comfort. I'm curious, Leo, have you had any personal experiences with safety concerns while traveling in China?
Well, I did have a close call with a pickpocket in Beijing once, but it was more of a minor annoyance than a serious safety concern. However, I've heard that some women travelers have experienced more serious harassment in China, especially in crowded areas.
Yes, that's true. But overall, China has a strong focus on tourism and has implemented many measures to ensure women feel safe and welcome. On the other hand, Guinea-Bissau is a very different story. As a small country in West Africa, it faces many challenges in terms of safety and security.
That's right. Guinea-Bissau has a reputation for being one of the most violent countries in the world. But I'm curious. Mira, what about the local attitudes towards women? I've heard that Guinea-Bissau has a strong cultural tradition of respecting women.
Ah, that's a great point. Leo, while Guinea-Bissau does have a complex history of cultural attitudes towards women, the country has also made significant strides in promoting women's rights and empowerment. In fact, Guinea-Bissau has one of the highest ratios of women in parliament in the world.
Wow, that's impressive. But what about safety concerns for women travelers in Guinea-Bissau? I've heard that the country has a high crime rate and that women are often targets of violence.
Yes, that's true. Unfortunately, Guinea-Bissau does have a high crime rate, and women travelers do need to take extra precautions to ensure their safety. With proper planning and research, it is possible to travel safely in Guinea-Bissau.
I see. Well, I think it's clear that both China and Guinea-Bissau present unique challenges for women travelers. But I'm curious. Mira, what advice would you give to women travelers who are considering visiting either of these countries?
Well, I would say that women travelers need to be aware of the local culture and customs, and to take necessary precautions to ensure their safety. In China, for instance, it's a good idea to learn and to respect local traditions. In Guinea-Bissau, it's essential to research local conditions and to stay informed about safety concerns.
That's great advice, Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that both China and Guinea-Bissau offer unique cultural experiences for women travelers. From the vibrant cities of China to the stunning natural beauty of Guinea-Bissau, there's no shortage of exciting experiences to be had.
Absolutely. Leo. And I think it's worth mentioning that both countries have a growing expat community, which can be a great resource for women travelers. In China, for instance, there are many online forums and groups for expats, which can provide valuable advice and support.
That's a great point, Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on tourism, which can make it easier for women travelers to plan their trips and stay safe.
Yes, that's true. And I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a rich cultural heritage, which can provide a unique and enriching experience for women travelers.
I completely agree, Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a growing economy, which can provide opportunities for women travelers to engage in entrepreneurial activities.
That's a great point, Leo. And I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a strong focus on education, which can provide opportunities for women travelers to learn about local culture and customs.
I see. Well, I think it's clear that both China and Guinea-Bissau offer unique opportunities and challenges for women travelers. But I'm curious, Mira, what do you think is the most important thing for women travelers to keep in mind when visiting either of these countries?
I think the most important thing for women travelers to keep in mind is to be aware of local culture and customs, and to take necessary precautions to ensure their safety. But also, to be open-minded and flexible, and to be willing to learn and adapt to new situations.
That's great advice, Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on community and family, which can provide a sense of support and belonging for women travelers.
Yes, that's true. And I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a rich cultural heritage, which can provide a unique and enriching experience for women travelers.
I completely agree, Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a growing economy, which can provide opportunities for women travelers to engage in entrepreneurial activities.
That's a great point, Leo. And I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a strong focus on education, which can provide opportunities for women travelers to learn about local culture and customs.
I see. Well, I think it's clear that both China and Guinea-Bissau offer unique opportunities and challenges for women travelers. But I'm curious. Mira, what do you think is the most important thing for women travelers to keep in mind when visiting either of these countries?
I think the most important thing for women travelers to keep in mind is to be aware of local culture and customs, and to take necessary precautions to ensure their safety. But also, to be open-minded and flexible, and to be willing to learn and adapt to new situations.
That's great advice, Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on community and family, which can provide a sense of support and belonging for women travelers.
Yes, that's true. And I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a rich cultural heritage, which can dive into the fascinating world of China's legal system and compare it to Guinea-Bissau's. Shall we? I'm curious to know how these two countries approach individual rights and freedoms.
What a great topic. China's got a reputation for being a bit restrictive, while Guinea-Bissau is more laid back, let's say. But, of course, that's a generalization. Let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Right. China's got a complex system, with a mix of socialist and capitalist elements. But have you noticed how they've been cracking down on dissent lately? It's like they're trying to balance freedom with, well, not so freedom.
That's one way to put it. And Guinea-Bissau, on the other hand, has a more relaxed approach. They're a bit more focused on community and traditional law, rather than strict codification.
Exactly. And I think that's where the two countries differ. China's got a more formal, top-down approach, while Guinea-Bissau's more organic, let's say. But which one do you think is more effective?
Well, it's hard to say. China's got a lot of resources and infrastructure, but Guinea-Bissau's got a more vibrant culture. Let's put it that way. But I think what's interesting is how both countries are trying to balance individual rights with collective interests.
That's a great point. And I think it's interesting how China's been using technology to monitor and control its citizens. It's like they're trying to create a perfect society, but at what cost?
The old utopian dream. But seriously, it's a complex issue. Guinea-Bissau, on the other hand, has a more informal approach to law enforcement. It's like they're relying on community and tradition to keep the peace.
That's right. And I think that's where the two countries differ. China's got a more formal, institutionalized approach, while Guinea-Bissau's more ad hoc, let's say. But which one do you think is more effective in the long run?
Well, it's hard to say. China's got a lot of resources and infrastructure, but Guinea-Bissau's got a more dynamic culture. Let's put it that way. But I think what's interesting is how both countries are trying to balance individual rights with collective interests.
Exactly. And I think it's interesting how China's been using its economic power to influence other countries. It's like they're trying to create a new world order. But at what cost?
The old China's gonna take over the world myth. But seriously, it's a complex issue. Guinea-Bissau, on the other hand, has a more independent approach to foreign policy. It's like they're trying to forge their own path without being influenced by external powers.
That's right. And I think that's where the two countries differ. China's got a more assertive approach to international relations, while Guinea-Bissau's more cautious, let's say. But which one do you think is more effective in the long run?
Well, it's hard to say. China's got a lot of resources and influence, but Guinea-Bissau's got a more innate perspective. Let's put it that way. But I think what's interesting is how both countries are trying to balance individual rights with collective interests.
Exactly. And I think it's interesting how China's been using its propaganda machine to shape public opinion. They're trying to create a perfect narrative, but at what cost?
The old China's got a PR problem. But seriously, it's a complex issue. Guinea-Bissau, on the other hand, has a more open approach to free speech. It's like they're trying to foster a culture of debate, but with some caveats. Of course.
That's right. And I think that's where the two countries differ. China's got a more restrictive approach to free speech, while Guinea-Bissau's more permissive, let's say. But which one do you think is more effective in the long run?
Well, it's hard to say. China's got a lot of resources and infrastructure, but Guinea-Bissau's got a more dynamic culture. Let's put it that way. But I think what's interesting is how both countries are trying to balance individual rights with collective interests.
Exactly. And I think it's interesting how China's been using its economic power to influence other countries. They're trying to create a new world order. But at what cost?
The old China's gonna take over the world myth. But seriously, it's a complex issue, and I think our listeners would love to weigh in on this topic. So, let's open it up to them. What do you think? Should China's economic influence be a cause for concern?
I'm so dive into the world of spa, healthy living, and relaxation opportunities in China and Guinea-Bissau. From tranquil temples to rejuvenating spas, we'll explore the unique wellness offerings in each country.
That's right. Mira, China is known for its ancient traditions of Qigong and Tai Chi, which promote balance and harmony in the body. And let's not forget about the luxurious spas in cities like Shanghai and Beijing, where you can indulge in hot stone massages and other pampering treatments.
Yes. And Guinea-Bissau, being a tropical country, has its own unique approach to wellness, with its stunning beaches and lush forests. It's the perfect destination for nature lovers and adventure seekers. But what about the spa scene in Guinea-Bissau? I'm curious to know more about it.
Well, Mira, while Guinea-Bissau might not have the same level of luxury spas as China, it has a rich cultural heritage when it comes to traditional healing practices. For example, the locals use herbal remedies and massage techniques to promote relaxation and well-being.
That's fascinating. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the cultural attitudes towards health and wellness in both countries. In China, for instance, there's a strong emphasis on maintaining a balance between yin and yang energies.
Exactly. And in Guinea-Bissau, the concept of Saudade is deeply rooted in the culture. It's a feeling of deep emotional and existential suffering, but also a sense of longing and melancholy. It's a unique approach to understanding the human experience.
I see what you mean, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners are curious about how these cultural attitudes impact the spa and wellness industry in each country. In China, for example, there's a growing trend towards wellness tourism, with many spas and resorts offering traditional Chinese medicine and holistic treatments.
That's right, Mira. And in Guinea-Bissau, while the wellness industry is still developing, there's a growing interest in ecotourism and sustainable tourism practices. Many locals are now offering eco-friendly tours and activities that promote environmental conservation and community development.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think the cultural attitudes towards health and wellness in these countries have an impact on the spa and wellness industry?
Well, Mira, I think it's clear that cultural attitudes play a significant role in shaping the spa and wellness industry in each country. But what about the role of technology in modernizing these industries? In China, for example, there's a growing trend towards using digital platforms to promote wellness and relaxation.
Yes. And I'm sure our listeners are interested in knowing more about the digital wellness revolution in China. In fact, I've heard that some Chinese spas are now using virtual reality technology to create immersive relaxation experiences.
Wow, that's amazing! And in Guinea-Bissau, while technology might not be as prevalent, there's still a growing interest in using digital platforms to promote wellness and community development. For example, some local organizations are now using social media to promote traditional healing practices and sustainable tourism practices.
I'm certain that our listeners living in China would agree with me that the digital wellness revolution is transforming the spa and wellness industry in exciting ways. And I'm curious to know, Leo, what do you think is the most significant challenge facing the wellness industry in Guinea-Bissau?
Well, Mira, I think one of the biggest challenges facing the wellness industry in Guinea-Bissau is the lack of infrastructure and resources. Many locals are struggling to access basic healthcare and wellness services, let alone luxury spas and wellness resorts.
I see what you mean. Leo, And I'm sure our listeners are interested in knowing more about the initiatives underway to address this challenge. For example, are there any local organizations or initiatives that are working to promote wellness and community development in Guinea-Bissau?
Yes, Mira. There are several local organizations and initiatives that are working to promote wellness and community development in Guinea-Bissau. For example, the Guinea-Bissau Wellness Association is a non-profit organization that aims to promote traditional healing practices and sustainable tourism practices in the country.
That's fantastic. And I'm sure our listeners are eager to learn more about the Guinea-Bissau Wellness Association and its initiatives. In fact, I'd love to invite our listeners to share their own experiences and insights about the wellness industry in Guinea-Bissau.
That's a great idea. Mira, and let's not forget about the importance of cultural exchange and collaboration in promoting wellness and relaxation. In China, for example, there's a growing interest in incorporating traditional Chinese medicine and holistic treatments into modern spa and wellness practices.
Exactly. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the cultural exchange initiatives underway in both countries. For example, are there any programs or initiatives that are promoting cultural exchange and collaboration between China and Guinea-Bissau?
Yes, Mira. There are several programs and initiatives that are promoting cultural exchange and collaboration between China and Guinea-Bissau. For example, the China-Guinea-Bissau Friendship Association is a non-profit organization that aims to promote cultural exchange and cooperation between the two countries.
That's wonderful. And I'm sure our listeners are eager to learn more about the China-Guinea-Bissau Friendship Association and its initiatives. In fact, I'd love to invite our listeners to share their own stories and experiences about cultural exchange and collaboration between China and Guinea-Bissau.
That's a great idea. Mira, and let's not forget about the importance of community engagement and participation in promoting wellness and relaxation. In China, for example, there's a growing trend towards community-based wellness programs and initiatives.
Exactly. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the community-based wellness initiatives in China. For example, are there any programs or initiatives that are promoting community engagement and participation in wellness and relaxation?
Yes, Mira. There are several programs and initiatives that are promoting community engagement and participation in wellness and relaxation in China. For example, the China Community Wellness Program is a nonprofit organization that aims to promote community-based wellness initiatives and programs.
That's fantastic. And I'm sure our listeners are eager to learn more about the China Community Wellness Program and its initiatives. In fact, I'd love to invite our listeners to share their own experiences and insights about community-based wellness initiatives in China.
That's a great idea. Mira, and let's conclude our discussion on spa, healthy living, and relaxation opportunities in China and Guinea-Bissau. I think it's clear that both countries have unique approaches to wellness and relaxation, and that cultural attitudes and community engagement play a significant role in shaping these industries.
Absolutely. Leo! And I'm sure our listeners will appreciate the insights and perspectives we've shared today. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the world of. I'm curious. Leo, how would you describe China's approach to spiritual growth and religious needs? Is it more formal or relaxed compared to other countries?
Well, Mira, China has a rich spiritual history, but its modern approach is indeed quite unique. You see, the Communist Party has been promoting a secularized society, which can be quite restrictive for some faiths. But at the same time, there's a growing interest in spirituality and traditional practices, especially among younger generations.
That's really interesting. I think it's because of the cultural significance of spirituality in Chinese history. But what about the role of Confucianism and Taoism in modern China? Do you think they're still relevant?
Oh, absolutely. Confucianism and Taoism are still deeply ingrained in Chinese culture, and many people continue to practice their teachings. In fact, the Communist Party has even incorporated some of these principles into their ideology, which is why you see a blend of traditional and modern elements in Chinese society.
I see. So, it's a bit of a mix. But what about the government's stance on foreign religions, like Christianity or Islam? Are they allowed to practice freely?
Well, Mira, That's a more complicated issue. While the Chinese government allows some foreign religions to operate, there are still strict regulations and controls in place. For example, the government has been cracking down on Christian churches and restricting the spread of Islamic extremism. It's a delicate balance between allowing religious freedom and maintaining social stability.
I understand. And what about the opportunities for spiritual growth in Guinea-Bissau? I'm guessing it's a very different story compared to China.
Oh, yes. Guinea-Bissau is a predominantly Muslim country, and Islam plays a significant role in the country's culture and identity. But what's interesting is that there's also a growing Christian population, and the government has been promoting interfaith dialogue and cooperation.
That's fascinating. I think it's because of the country's history of colonialism and the influence of different cultures. But what about the role of traditional African spirituality in Guinea-Bissau? Do you think it's still relevant today?
Yes. Traditional African spirituality is still very much alive in Guinea-Bissau, and many people continue to practice their ancestral traditions. In fact, the government has even established a ministry for traditional practices, which shows how important these customs are to the country's identity.
I'm curious. Leo, how do you think the Chinese and Guinea-Bissau governments approach spirituality and religious needs? Do you think they have similar or different priorities?
Well, Mira, I think the Chinese government prioritizes social stability and control, which can sometimes be at odds with individual spiritual freedom. In contrast, the Guinea-Bissau government seems to be more open to interfaith dialogue and cooperation, which is reflected in their approach to traditional African spirituality.
That's a great point. And what about the opportunities for spiritual growth and personal development in both countries? Are there any unique programs or initiatives that you think our listeners should know about?
Yes. In China, there are many programs and initiatives that focus on spiritual growth and personal development, such as meditation and mindfulness retreats. In Guinea-Bissau, there are also programs that promote interfaith dialogue and cooperation, as well as traditional African spirituality.
I'm curious. What do you think is the most significant difference between China and Guinea-Bissau when it comes to spirituality and religious needs? Is it the government's approach, the cultural significance, or something else entirely?
Oh, I think it's a combination of all those factors, Mira. But if I had to choose one thing, I'd say it's the government's approach to spirituality and religious needs. In China, the government has a more restrictive approach, while in Guinea-Bissau, the government is more open to interfaith dialogue and cooperation.
I see. And finally, I'd like to ask our listeners, have you had any experiences with spirituality and religious needs in China or Guinea-Bissau? What do you think about the approach to spirituality in these countries?
Yes. I'm sure our listeners have many interesting stories to share. Why don't we ask them to share their experiences in the comments section below?
I'm fascinated by China's efforts to promote social equality and respect for minorities. The government has implemented policies to reduce poverty and improve living standards for ethnic minority groups. For instance, the Belt and Road Initiative aims to connect China's vast regions and to promote economic development in areas with significant minority populations.
That's a massive undertaking, Mira. But I'm curious. How does China balance its economic growth with the need to protect minority rights? I've heard that some of these regions have been affected by land grabs and forced relocations.
Great point. Leo, the Chinese government has indeed faced criticism for its handling of minority issues. It's worth noting that China has made significant progress in promoting education and cultural preservation among minority groups. For example, the government has established programs to teach minority languages and promote cultural heritage.
That's interesting. But I'm not sure if that's enough to address the concerns of minority groups. I've heard that some of these groups have faced significant discrimination and marginalization. It's like, what's the point of promoting education and cultural preservation if the underlying systemic issues aren't addressed?
I agree with you, Leo. Systemic change is essential. But I think we need to consider the complexities of China's situation. The country has a massive population and a diverse range of ethnic groups. It's not easy to implement policies that address the needs of all these groups simultaneously.
I see what you mean. Mira, but what about Guinea-Bissau? How does it compare to China in terms of social equality and respect for minorities? I've heard that Guinea-Bissau has a relatively small population and a more homogeneous society.
Ah, yes. Guinea-Bissau is a great example of a country that's working to promote social equality and respect for minorities. The government has implemented policies to reduce poverty and improve access to education and healthcare for all citizens, regardless of their background.
That's wonderful to hear. Mira, but how does Guinea-Bissau balance its efforts to promote social equality with the need to address its economic challenges? I've heard that the country is heavily reliant on foreign aid and has struggled with corruption and instability.
Ah, great point. Leah, Guinea-Bissau does face significant economic challenges. The government has made efforts to address these issues through initiatives such as the National Development Plan. This plan aims to promote economic growth and reduce poverty by investing in infrastructure, education, and healthcare.
I see what you mean. Mira, but what about the role of civil society in promoting social equality and respect for minorities in Guinea-Bissau? I've heard that the country has a vibrant civil society sector that's working to address issues such as corruption and human rights abuses.
Ah, yes. Civil society plays a crucial role in promoting social equality and respect for minorities in Guinea-Bissau. Organizations such as the Guinean Human Rights League are working to promote human rights and address issues such as corruption and land grabbing.
That's great to hear. Mira, but I'm curious. How does China compare to Guinea-Bissau in terms of its treatment of minority groups? I've heard that China has been criticized for its handling of minority issues, particularly in the Xinjiang region.
Ah, yes. China's treatment of minority groups is a complex issue. While the government has made efforts to promote education and cultural preservation among minority groups, there have been allegations of human rights abuses and forced relocations in areas such as Xinjiang.
I see what you mean. Mira, but what about the role of grassroots efforts in promoting social equality and respect for minorities in both China and Guinea-Bissau? I've heard that grassroots initiatives are playing a crucial role in promoting social change and addressing issues such as poverty and inequality.
Yes. Grassroots efforts are essential in promoting social equality and respect for minorities in both China and Guinea-Bissau. Organizations such as the Chinese Grassroots Women's Networking, the Guinean Women's Association are working to promote social change and address issues such as poverty and inequality.
I see what you mean. Mira, but I'm curious. How can our listeners learn more about these issues and get involved in promoting social equality and respect for minorities in China and Guinea-Bissau? Are there any resources or organizations that you would recommend?
Yes. There are many resources and organizations that our listeners can turn to for information and support. For example, the International Observatory on Minority Rights provides a wealth of information on minority rights and social equality issues in China and Guinea-Bissau.
That's great to hear. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners would appreciate any additional resources or recommendations that you might have.
So, when it comes to taxation, I'm curious about China's approach. Do they have any special programs for long-term immigrants?
Yes. China has a complex tax system, but for foreigners, it's relatively straightforward. They can claim a tax credit for their foreign income, but it's essential to understand the rules to avoid any surprises.
That's interesting. I've heard that China has a high tax rate, but I'm sure it for the benefits. Speaking of benefits, what about retirement plans for long-term immigrants in China?
Well, China has a social security system, but it's not as comprehensive as in some other countries. However, foreigners can opt for a pension plan through their employer or set up their own individual plan.
I see. So, it's a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to retirement plans in China. But what about social rights for long-term immigrants? Do they have access to healthcare and other essential services?
Yes, China has a public healthcare system, and foreigners can access it. But it's not free. They need to pay a premium. and the quality of care can vary depending on the region.
That's a good point. I've heard that China's healthcare system can be quite good in some areas, but not so great in others. I'm curious about how this compares to Guinea-Bissau.
Guinea-Bissau. Well, that's a very different story. As a small country in West Africa, Guinea-Bissau's tax system is much simpler, and taxes are relatively low. However, the social safety net is also limited, and foreigners may need to rely on private health care and other services.
Wow, that's a big difference between the two countries. I can see why you'd want to plan carefully if you were moving to Guinea-Bissau. But what about retirement plans in Guinea-Bissau? Do they have any programs for long-term immigrants?
Actually, Guinea-Bissau has a pension plan for its citizens, but it's not open to foreigners. However, there are some private pension plans available, and foreigners can also opt for a retirement plan through their employer.
I see. So it's a bit of a challenge for foreigners to access retirement plans in Guinea-Bissau. But what about social rights for long-term immigrants? Do they have access to health care and other essential services?
Yes, Guinea-Bissau has a public healthcare system, but it's limited, and foreigners may need to rely on private healthcare. However, the government is working to improve the healthcare system, and there are some international organizations providing support.
That's great to hear. I'm sure our listeners living in Guinea-Bissau would agree that access to healthcare is essential. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this topic. Do they have any experiences or insights to share?
Yes. I'm sure our listeners have a lot to say. And speaking of experiences, I'm curious about what Mira thinks about the tax system in China. Do you think it's fair for foreigners to have to pay such high taxes?
Well, I think it's a bit of a trade-off. On the one hand, China's tax system is complex. But, on the other hand, it's a great opportunity for foreigners to invest in the country and enjoy the benefits. And I'm sure our listeners living in China would agree that it's worth it.
That's a good point. I'm sure our listeners living in China would appreciate your perspective. And speaking of perspective, I'm curious about what Mira thinks about the retirement plans in Guinea-Bissau. Do you think they're adequate for foreigners?
Well, I think it's a bit of a challenge for foreigners to access retirement plans in Guinea-Bissau. But I'm sure the government is working hard to improve the system, and there are some private options available. And I'm sure our listeners living in Guinea-Bissau would agree that it's essential to plan carefully for retirement.
That's a great point. I'm sure our listeners living in Guinea-Bissau would appreciate your advice. And speaking of advice, I'm curious about what Mira thinks about the social safety net in China. Do you think it's adequate for foreigners?
Well, I think China's social safety net is quite comprehensive, and foreigners have access to a range of services, including healthcare and education. But I'm sure our listeners living in China would agree that it's essential to plan carefully for emergencies.
That's a great point. I'm sure our listeners living in China would appreciate your advice. And speaking of advice, I'm curious about what Mira thinks about the tax system in Guinea-Bissau. Do you think it's fair for foreigners to have to pay such low taxes?
Well, I think it's a bit of a trade-off. On the one hand, Guinea-Bissau's tax system is simple and low. But, on the other hand, the social safety net is limited, and foreigners may need to rely on private services. And I'm sure our listeners living in Guinea-Bissau would agree that it's essential to plan carefully for emergencies.
That's a great point. I'm sure our listeners living in Guinea-Bissau would appreciate your perspective. And speaking of perspective, I'm curious about what Mira thinks about the retirement plans in China. Do you think they're adequate for foreigners?
Well, I think China's retirement plans are quite comprehensive, and foreigners have access to a range of options, including public and private plans. But I'm sure our listeners living in China would agree that it's essential to plan carefully for retirement.
That's a great point. I'm sure our listeners living in China would appreciate your advice. And speaking of advice, I'm curious about what Mira thinks about the social safety net in Guinea-Bissau. Do you think it's adequate for foreigners?
Well, I think Guinea-Bissau's social safety net is limited, and foreigners may need to rely on private services. But I'm sure our listeners living in Guinea-Bissau would agree that it's essential to plan carefully for emergencies.
That's a great point. I'm sure our listeners living in Guinea-Bissau would appreciate your advice. And speaking of advice, I'm curious about what Mira thinks about the tax system in Guinea-Bissau. Do you think it's fair for foreigners to have to pay such low taxes?
Well, I think it's a bit of a trade-off. On the one hand, Guinea-Bissau's tax system is simple and low. But on the other hand, the social safety net is limited, and foreigners may need to rely on private services. And I'm sure our listeners living in Guinea-Bissau would agree that it's essential to plan carefully for emergencies.
That's a great point. I'm sure our listeners living in Guinea-Bissau would appreciate your perspective.
Hey everyone, welcome back to our comparison podcast. Today, we're diving into the rate of meeting specific interests in China and Guinea-Bissau. I'm to share with you the unique offerings for enthusiasts in each country. China has an incredible number of hobby clubs and specialized events that cater to a wide range of interests, from traditional calligraphy to modern esports. I'm certain that our listeners living in China would agree with me.
That's right. Mira, China's love for hobbies and interests is unparalleled. From martial arts to cooking classes, there's something for everyone. And let's not forget about the amazing festivals and events that take place throughout the year, like the Shanghai International Film Festival and the Beijing Music Festival.
Ah, yes. And I think one of the most interesting aspects of China's hobby culture is the emphasis on traditional skills like calligraphy, painting, and playing the guqin. These ancient instruments and art forms are still widely practiced and appreciated today. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do any of you have a favorite traditional Chinese art form?
That's a great question. Mira, and speaking of traditional arts, Guinea-Bissau has a rich cultural heritage as well. The country is home to a vibrant community of artisans who create beautiful handmade crafts, like wood carvings, textiles, and pottery. If you're an enthusiast of handmade crafts, you might want to check out the Guinea-Bissau Craft Fair, which takes place every year in the capital city of Bissau.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And I think it's great that Guinea-Bissau is preserving its traditional crafts and passing them down to younger generations. In China, we also have a strong emphasis on cultural heritage and traditional crafts. In fact, many of China's traditional crafts, like silk weaving and ceramics, have been passed down for centuries and are still practiced today.
That's right. Mira, and speaking of traditional crafts, China has a thriving community of artisans who create beautiful handmade crafts, like jade carvings, bronze casting, and silk embroidery. These crafts are not only beautiful but also highly skilled and time-consuming to create. If you're an enthusiast of handmade crafts, you might want to check out the China Craft and Art Festival, which takes place every year in the city of Hangzhou.
Ah, yes. And I think one of the most interesting aspects of China's craft culture is the emphasis on innovation and creativity. Many Chinese artisans are now experimenting with new materials and techniques to create unique and modern designs. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do any of you have a favorite Chinese craft or artisan?
That's a great question, Mira. And speaking of innovation and creativity, Guinea-Bissau has a thriving community of artists who create stunning works of art, like paintings, sculptures, and installations. The country is also home to a number of art galleries and museums, like the National Museum of Guinea-Bissau and the Bissau Art Gallery. If you're an enthusiast of modern art, you might want to check out the Guinea-Bissau Art Festival, which takes place every year in the capital city of Bissau.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And I think it's great that Guinea-Bissau is showcasing its modern art scene to the world. In China, we also have a thriving community of artists who create stunning works of art, like paintings, sculptures, and installations. The country is home to a number of art galleries and museums, like the National Art Museum of China and the Shanghai Museum.
That's right, Lyra. And speaking of art, China has a long history of creating incredible works of art, like the Terracotta Army and the Great Wall of China. These ancient structures are not only breathtakingly beautiful, but also highly skilled and time-consuming to create. If you're an enthusiast of ancient history and architecture, you might want to check out the China Ancient History and Architecture Festival, which takes place every year in the city of Zion.
Ah, yes. And I think one of the most interesting aspects of China's ancient history is the emphasis on preserving and restoring ancient cultural heritage sites. In fact, many of China's ancient cultural heritage sites, like the Forbidden City and the Summer Palace, have been beautifully restored and are now open to the public for visitation.
That's right, Mira. And speaking of cultural heritage, Guinea-Bissau has a rich cultural heritage that reflects its African and Portuguese influences. The country is home to a number of cultural festivals and events, like the Guinea-Bissau Cultural Festival and the Bissau Carnival. These festivals showcase the country's vibrant music, dance, and art scene.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And I think it's great that Guinea-Bissau is celebrating its cultural heritage and passing it down to younger generations. In China, we also have a strong emphasis on cultural heritage and preserving our cultural traditions. In fact, many of China's cultural traditions, like the dragon dance and the lion dance, have been passed down for centuries and are still practiced today.
That's right, Mira. And speaking of cultural traditions, China has a thriving community of performers who create stunning performances, like acrobatic shows, dance performances, and music performances. The country is home to a number of performance venues, like the Shanghai Grand Theater and the Beijing National Theater.
Yes. And I think one of the most interesting aspects of China's performance culture is the emphasis on innovation and creativity. Many Chinese performers are now experimenting with new techniques and styles to create unique and modern performances. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do any of you have a favorite Chinese performance or artist?
That's a great question, Mira. And speaking of innovation and creativity, Guinea-Bissau is a thriving community of musicians who create stunning music, like traditional folk music and modern pop music. The country is home to a number of music festivals and events, like the Guinea-Bissau Music Festival and the Bissau Jazz Festival.
Well, that sounds amazing. And I think it's great that Guinea-Bissau is showcasing its vibrant music scene to the world. In China, we also have a thriving community of musicians who create stunning music, like traditional folk music and modern pop music. The country is home to a number of music festivals and events, like the Shanghai Music Festival and the Beijing Music Festival.
That's right, Mira. And speaking of music, China has a long history of creating incredible music, like traditional Chinese instruments and modern pop songs. These songs are not only catchy but also highly skilled and time-consuming to create. If you're an enthusiast of Chinese music, you might want to check out the China Music Festival, which takes place every year in the city of Hangzhou.
Oh, yes. And I think one of the most interesting aspects of China's music culture is the emphasis on preserving and restoring traditional Chinese instruments. In fact, many of China's traditional instruments, like the guqin and the pipa, have been